Chapter 519. Most of the time, the relationship between people didn't need to be described with words. Actions, expressions, and even the distance between them could be used as evidence. Since young, AI Lizi's gaze had always been on Luo Ye. Whether it was Luo Ye's expression or actions, AI Lizi was able to capture his thoughts that others couldn't. Because of this, after seeing Luo Ye outside Rosetta City, AI Lizi didn't act rashly. To be honest, this was beyond AI Lizi's expectations. Originally, AI Lizi expected that Luo Ye would have a stronger desire to protect Xia Luo because of her suffering, but it shouldn't have escalated to a sublimation of feelings. But in fact, the progress was far beyond her expectations. The moment she discovered that Luo Ye had changed, AI Lizi knew that the reddish-brown-haired girl must have done something. She could roughly guess the details, but she couldn't do anything about it. The 2-year age difference became an insurmountable barrier for AI Lizi. And this time, Xiaoluo's counterattack was a complete miscalculation on AI Lizi's part. In those last moments, Luo Ye wanted to experience the union with his lover. As long as she said so, Luo Ye couldn't refuse. And in fact, Xiaoluo did indeed break through Luo Ye's defenses. Remember in a second, just as Luo Ye was 100% sure that AI Lizi would miss him, the silver-haired girl also completely believed in Luo Ye's feelings for her. After not seeing him for so long, Luo Ye must have a lot of things to say to her. And deliberately keeping a distance made Luo Ye subconsciously start to care about AI Lizi. Originally, AI Lizi took the initiative to leave Akat territory to go to Rosetta City to see Luo Ye. But now, she couldn't contact him. This was simply putting AI Lizi's heart in a pan of oil. It was a complete torture. Are you thinking of me, elder brother? 2 hours had passed since the end of the banquet, and it was already midnight. At the end of the year, the stars and the moon shone in the sky, making Rosetta City, which had already entered winter, a little colder. However, in the hotel room, under the reflection of the fire, the two were full of warmth. Luo Ye originally planned to rest for the night and not interact with AI Lizi. However, he didn't expect that AI Lizi would appear in the carriage, catching the black-haired young man off guard. At the same time, some strange thoughts surfaced in Luo Ye's mind. This kind of precise landing, even if there is a special spell, it is impossible to be so perfect without practice, right? However, the interior of the carriage could be considered a private room to a certain extent, so it was better not to do such things. As for AI Lizi's question, Luo Ye had nothing to hide, so after being slightly surprised, she spoke the truth. It's not someone else's carriage. I'll only come if it's Big Brother's carriage. Hee, Big Brother. Did you miss me? So that's why. Is it because we haven't talked before? The 6 Xiaoluo couldn't stimulate Luo Ye's biological desires. The two of them must have been due to the sublimation of their feelings, and this seemed to be the correct way to woo her big brother. After understanding this point, the girl was filled with regret and decided to change her route. After making up her mind, AI Lizi's expression gradually became heavy, and Luo Ye quickly noticed that the girl's expression was wrong. The young man thought that he had made a mistake, and after thinking for a while, he probed. Hearing Luo Ye's words, the silver-haired girl shook her head and revealed a disappointed expression. After hesitating for a while, she opened her mouth and said, "Big brother, I want you to answer a question. Is AI Lizi really useful to you?" Chapter 520. The relationship between people is actually quite complicated. This is one of Roha's conclusions. For example, young children were a disadvantage to their parents, but their parents loved them dearly. Old parents were a burden to mature children, but the children loved their parents so much that they were willing to take care of them in their old age. When AI Lizi asked this question in a depressed mood, the young man behind her froze. He didn't understand what AI Lizi was talking about. As if sensing Luo Ye's confusion, the silver-haired girl explained. Yes, congratulations. You've reached Source Rank 3, right? It wasn't because of jealousy, nor was it because of his pride as an elder brother. Luo Ye didn't want AI Lizi's strength to continue growing. There was only one reason why he was worried. It was too fast. However, AI Lizi was only 14 years old, even if her birthday hadn't arrived yet. In Shiya's eyes, She wasn't even considered an adult and was still developing. Or rather, it was impossible for a normal human to do so. Luoya remembered that because of her age, AI Lizzie wasn't a very strong character even though she was talented. However, in reality, the silver-haired girl was almost on par with Nuwa Iyer and the others. The black-haired young man didn't know the answer to this question, but there was no doubt that this matter would cause a sensation if it was made public. AI Lizzie seemed to be aware of her situation, so she hid her strength and didn't reveal it at this banquet. Elder brother, I've indeed reached source rank 3, but to be honest, with the current situation, I don't think there's any meaning in my advancement. Elder brother, do you remember why I made up my mind to come into contact with extraordinary power? I've been working so hard to protect Elder brother. It's also to protect Elder brother that I thirsted for power. But after I obtained power, things didn't turn out as I imagined. Every time Big Brother is in danger, he won't tell me. Whether it was last time in the eastern region or this time when we're going to face those monsters, it was clearly a dangerous situation, but he insisted on not letting me know. In the face of the silver-haired girl's accusation, Luoya was momentarily speechless. Although Nuwa Iyer's visit was confidential, as long as Luoya requested, St. John would definitely allow AI Lizzie to accompany her. After all, AI Lizzie and Nuwa Iyer were childhood sweethearts. It could be said that their friendship was forged through fighting. At the end of the day, just as AI Lizzie had said, Luoya had never wanted AI Lizzie to protect her. Instead, she had treated the girl as her protector. This was where the problem lay. No, AI Lizzie, that's not what I meant. That is, under AI Lizzie's fact-based words, the black-haired boy retreated. He averted his eyes, not daring to look at the girl in the mirror. As for AI Lizzie, she became more and more aggrieved. Chapter 521. As the cold winter gradually entered its depths, France started to become lively as it neared the end of the year. The merchants who couldn't do business due to the cold winter shifted their focus to the mainland and prepared to welcome the new year. As for the higher-ups of France, an unprecedentedly solemn ceremony was about to begin. In the exquisite and elegant room of the Hundred Birds Hall, a black-haired boy looked at the red-haired girl in front of him and lowered his head slightly as he carefully apologized. Opposite him, Xia Luot had an expected expression on her face. "I'm sorry, Xia Luot. I wasn't able to complete last night's matter. During the banquet last night, the red-haired girl already had a premonition that AI Lizzie was up to something. But for the siblings who hadn't seen each other for a long time, even Xia Luot couldn't interfere, not to mention the two of them were living together. Xia Luot understood AI Lizzie too well. She was a shameless person who dared to drug her brother. She probably directly rushed into Luo Ya's room again. "Dear, what about worshipping the ancestors?" Roland said. Xia Luot, who had worked with AI Lizzie for many years, knew about her position in the Akhat family. For someone like her who controlled the Akhat family's intelligence network, it wasn't difficult for her to find out that the boy wanted to pray for the ancestors in France. The girl narrowed her eyes slightly as she prepared for a full-scale conflict and made up her mind to not back down. Before this, worshipping the ancestors together to confirm their status was a major matter in Xia Luot's eyes. She couldn't allow any mistakes, even if it meant breaking off relations with AI Lizzie. After getting through the crisis together, Xia Luot was like a wife to Luoya, and AI Lizzie was an irreplaceable family member. The two of them would definitely meet. However, it was worth mentioning that AI Lizzie and Xia Luot both indicated that they didn't need Luoya's presence. This made the young man, who was worried about Luoya, stunned. As for AI Lizzie and Xia Luot's doubts, they tacitly chose to remain silent. The black-haired boy naturally didn't know what the two girls were thinking, but it didn't affect anything. After Luoya left the Hundred Birds Hall, the meeting between the silver-haired girl and the young miss officially began. In the reception room of the Hundred Birds Hall, Xia Luot Sorofia looked at the silver-haired girl in front of her without saying a word. Opposite her, AI Lizzie Akhat was also silent. The two looked at each other for a few minutes without saying a word. In recent years, because Luoya had been cooperating with Xia Luot in the construction of Akate City, the frequency of Xia Luot's visits to Akate City had greatly increased. The number of times the two had fought openly and secretly was countless. Miss AI Lizzie, now that things have come to this, I think we don't have to specially exchange greetings, right? The topic? Hee, if that's the case, then let me say it first. This time, I want to worship the ancestors together with Luoya, so please don't disturb us. Miss Xiaoluot, are you mistaken? Although I'm an adopted daughter, my surname is still Akkad. Then, as a member of the Akkad family, isn't it obvious who should worship the ancestors? Chapter 522. Worshipping the ancestors was undoubtedly a serious matter, but from Luo Ya's perspective, it was also a troublesome matter to some extent. The black stone box wasn't made of ordinary materials. Instead, it was made of the stone of Requiem that was transported from the north of the theocracy. For thousands of years, it had been the designated material for the coffins of the Akkad family. As long as the body was placed in it, no matter how the external environment changed, it wouldn't turn into an undead. After Master Andrew led the team back to Rose, Luoya carefully examined the remains of the Arde family's ancestors that were found by the Saint Heroes Association. Unfortunately, most of them were blood and organs, and there wasn't a complete human body structure. Due to the thousands of years that had passed, the preservation condition was very poor. The black-haired young man was quite disappointed about this, but he wasn't too surprised. After all, compared to the heart preserved by the Ent priest's body, the remains were already dead even though they were also from thousands of years ago. The Saint Heroes Association's demand for the blood and remains would never stop just because they were buried in the coffins. The two of them were almost 100% sure about this. In order to cut off the evil thoughts of the cultists, Luoya could only choose to dispose of these things in the temple of the goddess of origin. AI Lizzie's silver hair paired with her white dress was as dazzling as the early winter snow. Xiaoluot's reddish-brown hair contrasted sharply with her white dress, giving off a sense of holiness. Today was the day Luoya and the others worshipped their ancestors. This was a well-known fact. Whether it was Xiaoluot or AI Lizzie, they had indeed focused all their attention on this solemn event. But in fact, for Luoya, today had another meaning. Today was the day he completely recovered. Luoya didn't think much about this at first. After all, whether it was because of Altatia's own reasons or because of Luoya's body, time could solve them. However, as time went by, things gradually went beyond the young man's expectations. It had been more than a week since Gulandair and the others returned, but there was still no news from Altatia. The contract formed by the bloodline of the Akkad family wasn't something that could be perfunctory. For an ancient queen like Altatia, she had long passed away, and Luoya was her anchor in this world. No matter what the Queen of Witches wanted to do or what opinion she had about Luoya, she couldn't bear the consequences. And based on the young man's understanding of the white-haired witch, Altatia wouldn't make such a reckless move. Looking at the burning flame in front of him, the black-haired boy couldn't help but frown. He was thinking about all kinds of possibilities in his mind. However, until the bell rang and the hymns began to sing, Roja's mind still didn't have any clue. No, it's nothing. Currently, there was still too little information. It was difficult to rely on imagination, so he might as well not think about it for the time being. No matter what the situation was on Altatia's side, Luoya didn't have a good way to deal with it without a clue. And for the current Luoya, there were obviously more urgent matters. After a series of meticulous operations, the black-haired young man completed the transfer of the remains with a serious expression. The two young ladies who were supposed to be his wives also stepped forward and carefully sealed the stone box. The young lady's salute caused another round of applause. Seeing this scene, Luoya breathed a sigh of relief. He secretly praised the blessing of the ancestors for finally getting through this difficult situation. Just like what Luoya did just now, the last step of this ritual of worshipping the ancestors required a bone picker and a keeper holding the stone box behind him to work together. Generally speaking, it was the husband and wife of the descendants. After Luoya became the bone picker, the identity of the keeper became the focus of the battle between AI Lizzie and Xiaoluot, and they had no intention of backing down. To be honest, although the position of the keeper was important, in Luoya's eyes, either of the two young ladies could be qualified for it. Now that he had to choose one, It was no different from killing 3 men with 2 peaches. After our collection and sorting, we can basically confirm that these remains and blood came from 2 people. The white-bearded old man was quite careful as he was worried that Luoya would feel uncomfortable after hearing this news. However, what he didn't expect was that the black-haired young man's expression suddenly became strange after hearing this. Then, he put his hands together and bowed to the heavens like an ancestor. After respectfully sending the stone box to the carriage, the ritual of worshipping the ancestors finally officially ended. With the end of this ritual, Luoya's mission in Rose was finally completed successfully. Dear, do you really want to leave so soon? Uncle Ka Dia's schedule. No, how can it be? This kind of thing doesn't matter. It's difficult for us to welcome the new year together with our current positions. As the successor of the Rose Commercial United Nations, Xiaoluo couldn't leave during the new year, and Luoya was also the acting lord when Ka Dia wasn't around, so there were a lot of things to do. Noticing the reluctance in Xiaoluo's heart, Luoya blinked, turned his head to look out of the window, and thought about something. Luoya asked Xiaoluo to come to the Akat house not to see him, but to see Luoya's father, Ka Dia. As for the black-haired young man's reason for doing so was actually very simple. It was to help the young lady obtain the recognition of Ka Dia. Xiaoluo, I know you are very uneasy, but don't worry, I will explain everything to my father. The young man turned his head, and his golden eyes were full of seriousness. Seeing such a young man, Xiaoluo's emotions were a little emotional. She looked at Luoya for a long time and finally nodded with a red face. After agreeing to find an opportunity to go to the Akat territory after the new year and explain the situation to Ka Dia, the black-haired young man finally said his parting words in a reluctant atmosphere. Xiaoluo nodded and sent Luoya all the way to the city gate. Accompanying him were many high-ranking officials of the Rose Commercial United Nations, including Bruce. For such a person to leave the Rose Commercial United Nations, sending him off was the basic etiquette. Not to mention this time Luoya also saved Xiaoluo. This time, Luoya and Xiaoluo's journey was really too difficult and dangerous, but fortunately, in the end, relying on the trust and strength of each other, Luoya finally passed the hurdle and eliminated one of his greatest enemies. Everything else was secondary. The safety of the red-haired young lady was Luoya's goal, and after achieving his goal, in this turbulent era, parting was inevitable. Finally, am I going home? Thinking so, the young man recalled his recent experience and slightly breathed a sigh of relief. However, what Luoya didn't know was that in the distant north of the Austin Empire, a conspiracy had already begun. Chapter 523. After half a year, when Luoya Akkad once again set foot on the land belonging to the Akkad family, the nearby mountains and rivers were already covered in silver. The cold wind mixed with the fluttering snow, dyeing the sky and earth silver. The feeling of home was perhaps the most indescribable feeling in people's hearts, and homesickness was a unique emotion that belonged to humans. No matter rich or poor, it was hard to avoid. But even so, after leaving for a period of time, the black-haired young man still missed this land because this was his foundation, and also the hometown where he spent a long time with his family. He grew up here and left behind many memories. But when he returned to this place, his restless heart inexplicably felt more at ease. In the past, Akkad territory was often desolate when winter approached. After all, to the people who were already living a difficult life, the cold winter was a major threat, and there was also the possibility of insufficient food. But after a few years of development, the southern part of Akkad territory was completely different. This kind of life in the past can be said to be heaven and earth, and as the life of the people got better and better, Roha's reputation also got higher and higher. Every time he passed by a village to resupply, he would be warmly welcomed, which was in sharp contrast to the other nobles who were cautious when they came. Big Brother is really popular, but are you sure you don't want to stay for a night? There's still time for Father's side, right? There's still time for Father's side, but we have to take a detour. I'm going to meet an acquaintance. As the acting lord of Akkad territory, Luoya could meet anyone in the territory with just a word. There was only one person in this territory that he had to meet personally, and that was the Ent who came here a few years ago. Recorder Cade. Cade's arrival was initially an invitation by Luoya with a one-sided attitude, but after arriving at Akkad territory, the giant ant didn't just act as a decoration, but contributed to Akkad territory in his own way. Under the management of the werewolves, the monsters in the southern forest of Akkad territory were forcibly reorganized and brought under Cade's management. With the beasts wearing collars, the wolf infestation that had plagued Luoya for a long time was finally resolved. However, that wasn't the end of it. What Luoya didn't expect was that the Ints used their own racial ability and the flow of curse power in the veins to build a sensor net that covered the entire Akkad territory. As the Lord of the Forest who already had standing forces such as monsters and werewolves, once Akkad was invaded by enemy forces, Cade could cooperate with Luoya to form an army of monsters and attack the enemy day and night. Every year, it was Luoya's duty as the acting lord to take a look at Cade's safety. On the other hand, the black-haired young man also had a lot of things to say this time. If Luoya and Cade's relationship was similar to that of friends and partners, then AI Lizzie, who had an almost unlimited life force, was the Int's object of respect. Every time he saw AI Lizzie, the giant Int would prepare a gift for her. On the other hand, the silver-haired young lady was supposed to enter the mountains. Surprise? Chapter 524. In the forest, the black-haired young man was drinking and chatting with the giant Int while using the source substance in his body to contact the Witch Queen on the other side. His expression showed that he had no intention of giving up. Originally, the ancient gods were already dead. The only reason they could move about in the modern world was because they had signed a contract with Luoya. Even in the worst-case scenario, Altacia would be completely lost and return to her dormant state before she met Luoya. Unlike the Gulen Dayer's reticence and the Pei Tila's silent protectiveness, Altacia's personality was like an interpretation of the nature of a witch. She did as she pleased and often came out to interact with Luoya privately. Occasionally, they would also have a battle of wits and courage, which added a lot of fun to the young man's life. Under such circumstances, Luoya naturally wouldn't be indifferent to the disappearance of the Witch Queen. And as long as the result of being separated for a long time didn't result in death, Luoya was confident that he could find the ancient gods even if they were temporarily lost. The moment that inexplicable feeling appeared in Luoya's heart, the black-haired young man's body froze and his eyes widened. But before Luoya could grasp the exceptionally familiar aura, that little bit of feeling had already dissipated into nothingness. It took the young man a moment to understand what had just happened, but everything was almost gone in the blink of an eye. Only Luoya's surprised cry could be heard in the silent forest, which even made the young man doubt the authenticity of the feeling. And seeing Luoya's reaction, the tall Ant asked about the situation. The channel to the Witch Queen on the other side had traces of curse power, which meant that Luoya had indeed come into contact with Altacia's channel in an instant. But what puzzled the young man was that the source substance of the crown not only had traces of coming into contact with the ancient gods, it also had traces of resisting some other power. The moment he understood this fact, the black-haired young man understood that Altacia was probably in trouble. And this was also the reason why Luoya couldn't get in touch with her. The witch race is a strange race. Although they are a race, they don't seem to be connected to each other. No one knows the details of their situation, so I can't deduce what happened to the ancient gods who signed a contract with you. Maybe that's the case, but, burp. If it's really an external interference, then I'm afraid that things will be troublesome. Troublesome? What you mean is home advantage. I understand that, but if that's the case... To be honest, at this point, the evil forces left behind by Shiya and Luoya more or less had some grudges against each other, so it wasn't strange for them to make a move. But fortunately, based on the connection of the channel just now, Luoya could be sure of one thing, and that was that Altacia should be trying her best to restore the connection between the two of them, and there should be some progress. The black-haired young man estimated that the two of them should be able to successfully reunite in a week at most. As for what exactly happened, he could only wait until then to ask Altacia personally. I'm sorry, big brother. There's a problem with the surprise I prepared. AI Lizzie said as she lowered her head slightly, blaming herself for not being able to fulfill the promised gift. The black-haired young man saw this and comforted her. Although he was curious about what the gift was, he didn't ask. Instead, he handed AI Lizzie a small bottle of warm honey wine to warm her body. Leaning into the young man's embrace and drinking the warm honey wine, AI Lizzie's face revealed a sweet smile. On the other side, the tall ant, as usual, saluted AI Lizzie and presented her with a gift. Luoya didn't say anything. Although the young man didn't know what a great existence was, he understood that it probably had something to do with AI Lizzie's, son of pale silver, bloodline. In fact, Rose Dawn's member, Juliana of the blood breed, also admired her. But it was worth mentioning that this time, after AI Lizzie broke through to Source Rank 3, the feeling she gave off was slightly different. Under the illumination of the silver moon, the girl's temperament had an additional layer of mystery, and the young man could also feel that the tall ant's attitude was more respectful this time. After visiting the ant and consolidating the alliance, Luo Ya's mission was considered complete. There were only a few days left until the end of the year. The next morning, the convoy set off. Under the young man's command, the convoy no longer had any scruples and headed towards Akate City at full speed. A few days later, in the mansion of the Marquis of Akate City, the black-haired young man looked at the familiar room and leaned on the sofa to relieve the fatigue of the journey. Beside the young man, a silver-haired girl held a teacup in her hand and gently blew on it, taking small sips to warm her body. Luoya Akate defeated the monsters that were thought to be invincible for a long time, 6 disasters, and made a great contribution to the human race. This news had gradually spread throughout the various countries, and in the headquarters of the Akate family, Akate City, this news was even more well known. However, during this period of time, their own feudal lord actually defeated and killed one of these monsters. This news was undoubtedly exciting, and it also gave everyone in Akate City a huge sense of security. Even in the Akate mansion, they could still hear the noises of the people on the streets. This was quite incredible for Luoya and the others. After all, the Akate mansion was not small and was quite far from the downtown area. In previous years, even during the new year, the noises of the people protesting could not reach here. Young master, do you want to turn on the mute barrier? Feeling the joy of the people outside the window and the liveliness on the streets, the black-haired young man was also affected. He stood by the window and looked into the distance with a smile as he rejected Anna's suggestion. On the other side, the silver-haired girl listened to the noises from afar and smiled. Work hard. But ever since I went to St. Freya Academy, I haven't been in the territory much. In the past 2 years, because of the changes in the external environment, the invasion of the mutants, and the attacks of the cultists, the black-haired young man was too tired to deal with them. He really had no spare energy to work, and the direct impact was that the economic growth rate of Akate City had slowed down a little. Although Big Brother no longer has any specific guidance, Akate City is still developing according to the plan you made at that time. In the end, the implementation of reforms, the construction of roads, the trade with Loche, these policies that made the territory prosperous were all made by Big Brother, so of course the credit goes to Big Brother. Because of the invasion of the mutants in the east, a large number of young people joined the army, so the economic development of Akate City was slightly slowed down. But even so, we are still the best developed territory in the theocracy. I can guarantee this to Big Brother. Young master, your plan is only half implemented, but it has already brought tremendous changes to the territory. The lives of the people have improved, and they all support you from the bottom of their hearts. During the prosperous times, the territory managed by the Akate family might not be a good place to live, but in these troubled times, the strong military power of Akate City was reassuring. And after Luoya kept creating history, he became the new benchmark of the Akate family after Kadia, who was not in the territory most of the time. Akate City, Akate Mansion, these were things that Luoya couldn't give up, and if there was an enemy that threatened his family, they would be dealt a heavy blow by the young man. Anna, how long until father returns? I see. When Luoya was still young, the black-haired young man had discussed the future with Kadia. At that time, Luoya, who hadn't awakened his bloodline, wasn't favored by Kadia, so the Marquis only gave him one mission, and that was to live. But even so, after reaching adulthood, Kadia had urged Luoya several times, especially after the war between the humans and the mutants. Leaving behind an heir had become the political correctness of the nobles of various countries. Looking at the silver-haired young girl beside him, Luoya's expression became strange. But just in case, the young man still decided to say some words and inform AI Lizzie in advance to reject any ridiculous request that might come. Thinking so, the young man smiled and looked confidently at the silver-haired young girl beside him and said softly, "AI Lizzie, there's something I want to discuss with you." The black-haired youth looked at the girl, his heart filled with guilt. He felt that Kadia had been too hasty this time. However, what the youth didn't know was that AI Lizzie's thoughts were completely different from his. Blinking her eyes, the silver-haired girl once again understood Luo Ya's words. She couldn't believe it for a moment. Could a pie really fall from the sky? How could he win while sitting at home? Once they got married, AI Lizzie could easily overcome the problem that had been hindering her for a long time, which was her sibling relationship with Luo Ya, in addition to Luo Ya's love for her. Although both the Marquis and the black-haired youth had always treated AI Lizzie as family, in this kind of important matter that concerned the survival of the family, AI Lizzie wasn't in a good position to express her position. Putting aside the fact that Luo Ya was the successor of the Akit family, AI Lizzie, as an adopted daughter, rebelled against Kadia's orders. This wasn't good in the eyes of the outside world. AI Lizzie, don't feel pressured. Just say what's in your heart. I believe that Father will still consider our words. Unsure if it was because of the consolation, after hearing Luo Ya's words, the silver-haired girl's eyes flickered with a determined look. Seeing this situation, the youth heaved a sigh of relief, as if everything was finally settled. However, although Luo Ya was opposed to making a move on AI Lizzie, the black-haired youth's attitude was very clear. He firmly opposed it and even ignored the girl's opinion. But no matter what, to the black-haired youth, this hurdle of his father was something that he had to overcome. After a series of preparations, the confident Luo Ya finally welcomed the day of Kadia's return. The return of the overlord of Akate City, Kadia Akate, set off a storm in Akate City during the new year. For ordinary people, stability meant everything in troubled times. Kadia was naturally welcomed by the people, but compared to Luo Ya, the scale of the welcome was slightly smaller. However, this wasn't because Kadia wasn't good enough, but because Luo Ya was too good. On the other hand, there was a difference in the age of the supporters of both sides. As the next overlord, Luo Ya's supporters were mostly young adults who benefited from the development of the territory, especially among the women. On the other hand, Kadia's supporters were mostly composed middle-aged and elderly people. Therefore, the way and atmosphere of both sides were completely different. Different crowds and different ways of welcoming made it difficult to distinguish between the two sides. However, whether it was Luo Ya or Kadia, this wasn't important. Right now, the father and son were focused on other things. This time, Kadia didn't return home without a purpose. In fact, the Marquis who was at the front line could choose not to come back. However, when he thought of his hometown that was empty, Kadia's heart trembled. He had no choice but to come back. The Marquis still remembered that a few years ago, at the same table, Kadia looked at Luo Ya who was being fought over by several talented girls. He felt that his son's method of picking up girls was unfathomable. No, strictly speaking, the youth didn't do nothing. It was better to say that he had achieved a lot. However, when it came to relationships between men and women, the youth was unusually rigid. Simply put, he was too restrained. Regarding this point, if the Akot family was a prosperous family, Kadia would be quite satisfied. After all, it would be a big problem to have an illegitimate child. However, in the Akot family, Luo Ya's overly good moral character made Kadia's head explode. There are so many good girls. Even if it's Rachit's child, it doesn't matter. What kind of situation is this? As a widower who had been single for more than 10 years, Kadia's degree of purity was better than Luo Ya's. Naturally, there was nothing to criticize. However, the Marquis thoughts didn't change. With a slight sigh, Kadia looked at the youth with a rare look of disappointment. However, When he saw the girl beside the youth, Kadia's heart slowly calmed down. But for AI Lizi Akat, there was no such worry at all. In a situation where both of the Akat family members could go to the battlefield, AI Lizi absolutely couldn't go to the front line. Looking at AI Lizi, who sat quietly beside the youth, Kadia's expression gradually calmed down. Putting down the teacup, the Marquis looked at the two children and asked about their recent situation. The battle was really difficult. I was slightly injured, but now I have basically recovered. For the soldiers who fought on the front lines, it was almost instinctive for them to be concerned about logistics and supplies. Currently, the Human Alliance's largest supply depot was the Ross Commercial United Nations, and from the Akat family's perspective, the Ross Commercial United Nations was an inseparable military and economic partner. Father, this time when I left Ratchet, Uncle Bruce asked me to bring you a letter. It should be a handwritten thank you letter. It contains the reward provided by Ratchet's side to thank us. Looking at the letter that Luoya handed over, the black-haired, middle-aged man curled up the corner of his mouth and received it. After roughly reading it, Kadia's face revealed a rare expression of surprise. And the reason was very simple. Ratchet's reward was too generous. Kadia, who was originally worried about Luoya's injury, immediately betrayed himself after reading Bruce's handwritten letter. He no longer mentioned Luoya's injury. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the black-haired youth also made a request. Let's meet. That child has also suffered this time. No matter what, you still have an engagement. However, as the saying goes, there are pros and cons. Although Luoya fulfilled his promise, this was not the Ratchet family, but the Akat family. The silver-haired girl beside Luoya pouted at this time. Seeing this situation, the black-haired youth looked helpless and hurriedly threw out a new topic. The black-haired youth said so he explained the discovery of Master Andrew and the situation of the ancestors' remains. And just as Luoya guessed, Kadia's face suddenly turned gloomy and serious, showing a rare, strong hostility. After listening to the explanation, the Marquis, who learned that the cultists were actually eyeing the Akat family, the most scarce resource, could not bear it anymore. With a gloomy face, he decided to send out troops on the spot, and decided to join forces with Ratchet to encircle and annihilate the remnants of the Saint Heroes Society. Praying in Shiya's temple was a very appropriate way to handle this matter, and it calmed the Marquis' heart a little. However, when he heard that this ceremony was for 3 people, Kadia's expression became subtle. After thinking for a while, the Marquis looked at Luoya and said, "Well, I understand. I'll arrange it later." Huh? In the face of Kadia's sudden change, the black-haired youth could not help but blink with a puzzled look on his face. However, his son's puzzlement did not make the Marquis' face change. Kadia looked at Luoya's golden eyes and asked solemnly, "This, to completely eradicate the Saint Heroes Society and avenge them?" After listening to Luoya's answer, Kadia first nodded, then shook his head and continued, "Inheritance? Father, you mean?" "One of the reasons I came back this time is to remind you to take action and fulfill your obligations. The holy war of the theocracy." Hearing the Marquis' words, the black-haired youth was unmoved on the surface, but he was not surprised in his heart. Beside Luoya, the silver-haired girl suddenly raised her head and looked at the middle-aged man who spoke. "Father, I know about the holy war, but isn't this too sudden? AI Lizi and I are not ready yet." Listening to Roha's excuse, Kadia couldn't help but ridicule him in her heart. If it was something else, then it's possible to sharpen one's spear at the last minute. But when it comes to the biological instinct of reproduction, then any normal male would be like a dragon. Not to mention, it's not like the noble didn't teach them physiology. Although the Marquis was quite anxious about the offspring, as a father, Kadia still respected AI Lizi's personal wishes. The girl and Luoya's relationship was not a problem, but the matter of having children seemed a little too early for the girl who had just reached adulthood, so he should ask her first. With this thought in mind, Kadia asked the girl's wishes, and Luoya slowly curled up the corners of his mouth, rejoicing that he had asked the girl in advance. "Father, I think it's indeed a little inappropriate." After hearing AI Lizi's words, Kadia could not help but let out a sigh, But before the Marquis could withdraw his suggestion, AI Lizzie's shy voice sounded again. If it's children, at least two. Chapter 526. Since ancient times, it was common knowledge that a sudden attack was the most effective way to punish someone. As someone who was well versed in the art of war, Kadia didn't reveal any information to Luoya before he arrived. Due to some other reasons, Kadia didn't inform AI Lizzie either. However, Kadia was initially apprehensive about hiding the fact that AI Lizzie was one of the parties involved. After all, the silver-haired girl wasn't the Marquis' biological daughter, and there were many things that required basic etiquette. However, when he thought about AI Lizzie's feelings for Luoya, the Marquis was slightly relieved. In Luoya's previous life, men and women would often choose to live together before marriage as a test of their lives together. During this period of time, most couples would reveal many problems and even cancel their marriage decision. As the saying goes, whether or not they're suitable for each other, you'll only know after you give it a try. However, such a situation didn't exist for Luoya and AI Lizzie. Ever since they were young, AI Lizzie and Luoya had never quarreled. The longest period of coldness between them after they got angry was 3 days, and every time, their relationship would become better. However, what he didn't expect was that when Kadia met Luoya and proposed his next child, AI Lizzie actually objected to this decision. In Kadia's opinion, this was like the sun rising from the west. It was something that was almost impossible. The Marquis who thought so had a puzzled expression. However, he didn't expect that the reason why he ran into a wall was because the black-haired boy had already predicted this matter through the letters they exchanged. He even colluded with AI Lizzie to come up with a countermeasure. However, the black-haired boy didn't know that his pride and arrogance didn't last for long. Although the sharp stab in his back was late, it still arrived. Yes, so father, With the Akkad family's current situation, I think it's too dangerous to have an only child. Moreover, there's often no one at home. It's too lonely to have one child. No matter if it's from the perspective of safety or the health of the next generation, it's better to have 2 or more children. What's going on? AI Lizzie, what are you talking about? Didn't we agree? AI Lizzie, don't feel pressured. Just say what's on your mind. I believe that father will consider our words. Does Big Brother like children? If you like, you can get more. AI Lizzie is fine. Luoya didn't know how to respond to the young lady's blissful words. On the other hand, Kadia was overjoyed, feeling that she had finally solved a huge problem in her heart. If love had a form, Luoya believed that it was probably a very slender and weak seedling. Whether it was cultivation or growth, it needed many factors, one of which was time. With such thoughts, the black-haired boy was in a dilemma. Facing Kadia's urging, he didn't know how to explain. However, just as Luoya was having a headache, the boy's hand was suddenly grasped by a slightly cold and slender hand. Luoya, who felt something strange under the table, widened his eyes slightly and looked at AI Lizzie. The silver-haired young lady took advantage of the time when Kadia was drinking tea to secretly wink at the boy. Her red eyes were filled with slyness. The moment he saw AI Lizzie's expression, the black-haired boy couldn't help but widen his eyes. The boy who had lived together with her for many years immediately understood the young lady's meaning and smiled. On the other side, Lord Marquis put down his teacup and began to interrogate again. Chapter 527. In front of the entrance of Akkad Mansion, a black-haired young man and a silver-haired young lady were chatting. Their impeccable appearance could be called a perfect match. Not far away, Anna and the other maids were carefully observing the movements between the two. In front of the door, the black-haired young man said something that made the silver-haired young lady blush. Although Anna and the others were curious, they couldn't pry. However, they were certain that something good must have happened to AI Lizzie. Before this, no matter what means AI Lizzie used, such as the activation of life energy or the conversation between her and AI Lizzie, Luoya had never expressed her feelings for the two. She only avoided the topic by saying that AI Lizzie was still a child. This time, Kadia assisted AI Lizzie in breaking through the tower. Although AI Lizzie was happy to receive support, she wasn't very optimistic about the outcome. But what the young lady didn't expect was that Kadia's words seemed to have some effect on Luoya. It led the black-haired young man to take a step closer to the relationship between the two and spoke his thoughts. The black-haired young man said so with a serious expression, clearly expressing the importance he attached to AI Lizzie, and the silver-haired young lady also understood this point. Although AI Lizzie didn't dislike the fact that a mother's status depended on her child, if the person she loved her more than anything else, even to the extent of having a child, it was naturally the best. Compared to a love centered around AI Lizzie and a love centered around a child, the former was obviously more blissful. Bro, if that's what Big Bro thinks, then I support you. Let's pretend to be father for the time being. With a smile on his face, the young man gestured to the silver-haired young lady. AI Lizzie blinked and nodded, placing her slender little hand in Luoya's palm. Finally, I temporarily gave up on AI Lizzie's idea of having children, but what should I do in the future? Although AI Lizzie was technically fine due to her bloodline, Luoya still felt that it was too much of a stretch. Luoya, who had doted on AI Lizzie since she was young, couldn't bear to see AI Lizzie suffer. Moreover, judging from her age, AI Lizzie had just reached adulthood and hadn't finished puberty yet. Elder brother? Hiding his thoughts, the black-haired boy and the girl chatted for a while. Soon after, Kadia also came downstairs, and the group got on the carriage. Luoya and AI Lizzie naturally shared the same carriage. On the other side, Kadia looked at the two children who sat together naturally and smiled helplessly. He didn't understand why they needed an old man like him to assist them when they were already so close. Originally, the main cities of the 5 major aristocratic families were second only to the holy capital. In the past, due to the poor economy of Akate territory, Akate City wasn't very prosperous. However, with Luoya's reforms, Akate territory was revitalized, and as the main city, Akate City also became more and more prosperous. This situation continued until a year ago. After the civil war in the theocracy ended, the 5 major aristocratic families that had been passed down for thousands of years became 4. The Eric family was destroyed, and their territory was divided. With the addition of this flow of people, Akate City could be said to have made up for its last shortcoming. It quickly began to be reborn, becoming a big city with people and money in one fell swoop. Its comprehensive ranking jumped to second place in the theocracy. The main labels were trade, stability, and the construction of the city also ushered in a wave of climax. After solving the problem of quantity, the next test was quality. In the theocracy of St. Maester, when it came to city construction, there was one thing that couldn't be ignored, and that was the local church. Chapter 528. After the New Year's prayer meeting, Luoya Akat's feelings didn't change much. On the way back, Luoya thought for a long time, but he couldn't find a suitable reason. Seeing the young man like this, AI Lizzie was worried, and during breakfast, she directly asked Kadia for a solution. Uneasy? This. Obviously, even someone as experienced as Kadia couldn't deduce anything without any information. But even so, Lord Marquis didn't mean to be perfunctory, but after thinking for a while, he gave a few possibilities. The black-haired middle-aged man seriously reminded Luoya to pay attention to his surroundings, and the young man heard this and had some new ideas, but after thinking seriously, Luoya still shook his head. But before Luoya could reject this possibility, Kadia raised another conjecture, and that was his own problem. 1 second, remember internal? So that's how it is. Luoya wasn't a physical extraordinaire, so there was no possibility of his body being deformed. But when it came to the young man's ability, Luoya's closest relationship with the ancient gods had some problems. As the target of the contract, the ancient gods and Luoya were almost bound together for good or ill. It could be said that they shared a common destiny, and it seemed reasonable to count them as part of Luoya's contract. It wasn't the first day Altacia went missing, and she had been missing for half a month, so how could he only feel it now? Wasn't intuition generally the nature of prediction? First of all, naturally, he had to continue to collect information from all sides, be vigilant at all times, and be careful of plots from the dark. On the other hand, Luoya had to continue to improve his strength and try to get in touch with Altacia as soon as possible. After going around in circles, everything still returned to the crucial point of strength. Such a situation made Luoya feel helpless. Unable to calm down, the black-haired youth also lost his desire to sleep. After breakfast, Ai Lizzie and Kadia returned to their rooms to rest, while the black-haired youth walked towards the study room alone. Although there was no such thing as the 15th day of the new year in St. Maester, people from all walks of life had a long break. However, as the person in charge of Akkad territory, Luoya still had a lot of work to do, especially after a long backlog. The larger the territory, the more things that needed to be approved. After Luoya came to power, there were many new policies that the officials did not understand. The black-haired young man's order was to report anything that they did not understand, which led to the current situation. Usually, when Luoya was approving documents, he would often have several helpers, but because of the new year, most of the servants hired by the Akkad family had gone home for the holidays, so there was a shortage of manpower. Thus, only Anna could help. When they were young, the black-haired youth doted on the silver-haired girl, so he did not let Ai Lizzie come into contact with official business. He did not want her to be busy at such a young age. However, as Luoya became the acting lord, the territory began to gradually reform. The black-haired youth became increasingly busy, to the point that he did not even have time to return to the mansion. Thus, the girl changed. Thus, Ai Lizzie worked hard and began to learn how to deal with government affairs. After Luoya went to school, she quickly took over the work. Thus, strictly speaking, the work that Luoya dealt with in the past 2 years was not as much as Ai Lizzie. Today is the first day of the new year. Ai Lizzie must be tired from going to school this year. Let her have some fun. Even I don't want to work during the new year, let alone Ai Lizzie. Anna, you should go too. When Ai Lizzie wakes up, you can go out with her for a stroll. It's okay. Actually, I want to be alone. At the dining table, the servant girl who heard Luoya's uneasiness understood the situation. She lowered her head slightly and followed the youth's suggestion. The two began to work together. After the black-haired youth dealt with a large pile of documents, his mind gradually became focused, and his uneasiness was alleviated. Originally, for nobles who had afternoon tea and banquets, the status of lunch was not too important. Luoya did not have the mood to carefully savor the food. Originally, the black-haired youth wanted to eat while working, but this behavior was stopped by Anna. After saying so, Anna bowed and softly advised Luoya to eat normally. Seeing this, the black-haired youth could only temporarily put down his pen and eat a proper meal. After lunch, as a rest, Luoya read the many letters that were specially sent to him. Naturally, he did not know the contents of the letters since they were unsealed. However, among the many letters this year, a few of them quickly attracted Luoya's attention, and the reason was very simple. These letters were printed with the national emblem. They were the congratulatory letters sent to Luoya by several major countries and the headquarters of the joint army of Shiya. Last time, although Luoya received a complete letter, it was the glory that belonged to the winner of the Challengers Cup. Whether it was Luoya or the champion of the previous generation, it was the same. However, the letter that the youth received this time was different. One was a conferring letter for the champion, and the other was a letter to win Luoya over. Whether it was the standard or the feeling of reading it, it was very different. But what really caught Luoya's attention was the difference between the letters from various countries. Just by looking at this letter, Luoya was definitely the most devout believer of Shiya in 100 years. The praise was unprecedentedly great, and the black-haired youth blushed a little. But after thinking about it, Luoya understood more. To a certain extent, the praise of the theocracy was already a strategic goal. And after the theocracy, the praise was followed by the Rose Commercial United Nations, which had deep cooperation with Akkad territory. However, the direction of Rose's praise was different from that of the theocracy. Rose was mainly praising kindness. After reading this letter, Luoya couldn't help but smile bitterly. He now understood why Ai Lizzie went to Rose. According to Rose's praise, it would be strange if Ai Lizzie's blood pressure wasn't high. Although the black-haired boy was helpless, he understood. After all, Roja's fame was a glory for the school. Even if there were many students in St. Freya's College, they still needed to maintain their image through publicity. It wasn't shameful to brag about it. After pausing for a moment, Luoya focused his attention on the letter from the Austin Empire. After opening the simple and elegant envelope, the letter from the Austin Empire came into view. After reading it, Luoya also noticed that it was different from the other 3 letters. Official document, standard official document. It seemed respectful, but it didn't have the slightest sincerity. Without a doubt, for a letter to the hero who defeated the 6 disasters, this was very abnormal. Even if Luoya was a noble of the Saint Maester theocracy, the Akmen who had always regarded themselves as the orthodox human race shouldn't be so negligent. Instead, they should be praising the human warrior. Looking at the letter from the Austin Empire, the black-haired youth narrowed his eyes slightly. Of course, he remembered the order that the Austin Empire's emperor gave to Lillian. Through today's letter, it could be said that Luoya once again saw the disgust and dislike that Emperor Lucas had for him. Thinking of this problem, Luoya was puzzled. He looked at the letter and frowned deeply. Anna, who was beside him, couldn't help but ask, "No, nothing, just some problems." "Anna, under what circumstances do you think the royal family of a country will be hostile to the noble family of another country?" Hearing Luoya's sudden question, the servant girl couldn't help but blink and ponder. After a moment, she shook her head slightly. A problem left behind by history? Currently, the Akkad family was located in the theocracy, far away from the Austin Empire's emperor. Both sides might not even see each other once in their lifetime. In terms of benefits, both sides had no intersection. The Akmen had a vast empire, so it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were filthy rich. On the other hand, the Akkad family was more relaxed. As long as they had food to eat, they could fight. The Akkad family, as the Shadow Eagle who once supported the Akmen in the Second Era and led the Twilight Sage Association to maintain the stability of the world, had now turned to support the Austin Empire's sworn enemy, the Heidi family. It was inevitable that these arrogant Austinians would view them as a traitor. The Akkad family would also be displeased with them, but it seemed that there was no need to specifically target them. Thinking about the history of the Second Era, Luoya, who was quite dissatisfied in his heart, threw the letter from the Austin Empire aside and turned to read the letter from the knight's country, Ponde. However, what the youth didn't expect was that as soon as he opened the letter, a person's name appeared before his eyes. Friedrich Cambernat. Chapter 529. Friedrich Cobernat. This was a name that Luoya was half familiar with and half unfamiliar with. What he was familiar with was the Cobernat surname that represented the King of Knights, but what he was unfamiliar with was this man's name. The Kingdom of Knights, Pinder, had always been a maverick. They were far away from the center of Shiya and formed their own faction. Originally, the king of this country was called the King of Knights by the outside world. There was no special meaning behind it. It simply referred to the king of the Kingdom of Knights. However, this custom was changed by this generation's king, and the reason was very simple. It had to be said that this unique skill was very philosophical. The warriors under Friedrich couldn't stand it. After all, the Kingdom of Knights revered martial arts. No one wanted to follow a person who rode a horse and held a spear in front of the enemy and suddenly flipped over. In fact, if it wasn't for Friedrich's identity, he would have been kicked back home long ago. As an extraordinaire, body mutation was inevitable. After mutation, one's strength, speed, coordination, and so on would increase greatly, especially for a knight-type extraordinaire who relied on their physical body. Even if it was a source rank 5, it would not be easy for them to fall off their horse. That's right. Because he couldn't ride a horse, Friedrich didn't ride a horse anymore. Instead, he became an infantryman. From then on, he only specialized in one thing, cutting people down, and it turned out that he succeeded. From then on, no matter how stubborn a traditional conjurer was, they didn't dare to look down on the Kingdom of Knights. Friedrich became a sword saint and left his name in history. He jumped out of the Kingdom of Knights convention of only having a King of Knights. Although Luoya didn't know what Friedrich's codename was, he should be from the same generation as Guardian, Antonio. They were both the last generation of the Twilight Sage Association. Because of this, the two of them had a good relationship. They had even gone through life and death together on the battlefield against the mutants. But Roja had to say that although he heard about the King of the Night's country and even received his help, he didn't have any contact with him. So when he saw the name of the King of the Night's country, he couldn't help but be surprised. This letter from the King of the Kingdom of Knights, Friedrich, could be said to be completely different from the other letters. Compared to the previous letters that bragged about Luoya, this letter lacked a lot of praises. However, it didn't have the alienation of the Austin Empire. Instead, it was like a spring breeze. However, if that was all, Luoya would only sigh that Friedrich was a good comrade of the Twilight Sage Association and a good senior to Luoya. What really surprised him was the other contents of the letter. Friedrich Luoya. Chapter 530. The black-haired young man chose to soothe the unsettled emotions in his heart by working. This could be considered one of his methods, but it didn't mean that Luoya didn't carry out the plan he made last night. Although Luoya had reached the peak of Source Rank 3, breaking through to Source Rank 2 wasn't easy. The barrier between Source Rank 2 and the strongest under the King of Races was quite thick. Even the black-haired young man didn't dare to say that he could easily break through it. Due to this reason, the black-haired young man gradually felt sleepy and dozed off in front of the desk. But he didn't expect Altatia's voice to ring in his ears the moment he was about to fall asleep. The moment the voice of the Queen of Witches entered Luoya's ears, the black-haired young man's thick sleepiness immediately disappeared. He sat up abruptly and listened carefully. But the voice in his mind flashed and disappeared. There were no traces of the passage connecting, which meant that the black-haired young man didn't get in touch with Altatia. So, according to common sense, it was naturally impossible for him to hear anything. As the saying goes, what one thinks in the day, one dreams at night. Luoya had been tormented by an inexplicable sense of uneasiness since last night. He couldn't even fall asleep and felt a little nervous. Under such circumstances, it was reasonable for him to have a short dream and hear Altatia's voice urgently trying to contact him. The black-haired young man pondered in silence and considered all the possibilities. There was no doubt that the possibility of mishearing was the highest. But after pondering for a long time, Luoya slowly shook his head and rejected this most likely option. And the reason was simple. That was what Luoya heard. Run. As the Queen of Witches, who was feared by all races in ancient times, Altatia appeared to be playful, but in fact, she had a strong sense of self-esteem. Luoya paid attention to this in the process of interacting with her. Even if they had different opinions, he never showed any disrespect or contempt toward her. The human brain could record memories, but it could not create memories, especially things that had never been heard before. On the other hand, even if the voice was really synthesized by the brain, the content was not right. If they were in the wilderness or in a foreign land, it would be fine. But now, Luoya was in the Marquee Mansion in Acate City. This was the place where Luoya grew up. It was undoubtedly the place that the black-haired boy was most familiar with. It was also the place where his mood was the most stable. Thinking up to this point, Luoya was basically certain that it was Altatia's voice just now. She did not use the channel that she usually used to communicate with Luoya. Instead, she used another method that the black-haired young man did not know about. This should not be difficult for the witches who possessed an innumerable amount of knowledge. Her goal was also very simple, to warn Luoya. I'm afraid I'm really in trouble. Run. This sentence could be said to be relatively simple and easy to understand. It meant to ask someone to leave and head to a safe place. However, considering Luoya's current situation, this word was very inappropriate. In theory, there was no danger at all. On the other hand, even if Luoya wanted to fulfill the Witch Queen's request, he did not know how to do it. If the unknown danger was really approaching, then it would be better not to leave. It would be better to deal with the changes by staying put. Another deeper reason was that Luoya could not leave, and that was his duty as the city lord. It was the new year, and the streets of Acate City were filled with people. The sound of merchants hawking their wares could be heard everywhere. The entire city was thriving. If the upcoming disaster could affect this city, then as the owner of this city, it would be Luo Ya's duty to protect Akate City and its residents. Even with Altatia's warning, the young man could not shamelessly escape. Otherwise, it would be Luo Ya's lifelong shame. Chapter 531. The streets of Akate City were very lively this year. Even at night, the crowds didn't go home. After the large-scale trade with Lo She, the cost of many things was reduced, and the price of the lighting curse vessel dropped a lot. Therefore, other than streetlights, there were other kinds of lighting in the city. Luoya would frown when he encountered trouble, but when he encountered trouble that was difficult to solve, he would be expressionless because it could make him passive and calm, so that he could face everything with a clear mind. But this time, the young man's expression came too quickly, and the reason was very simple, that is, the unknown. As a result, the black-haired young man couldn't fall asleep until night. In fact, until now, except for Luo Ya's own uneasiness and Altatia's words, no one, including Paitila and the others, had discovered the enemy. In the eyes of outsiders, Luo Ya was probably fighting with the air, and using this reason to ask for support was naturally insufficient. A year ago, Nuwa Ayer's bloodline outbreak, and not long ago, Xiaoluo's curse, Luo Ya played a decisive role in these two incidents. Strictly speaking, the Holy See and Lo She both owed the young man a favor, and from their standpoint, the three parties were basically the same. Thinking that the home that he grew up with and created countless memories might be caught in the flames of war, Luo Ya's mood was particularly heavy, and this was one of the reasons why he couldn't fall asleep. However, before Luo Ya could see enough of the fireworks in Akate City, a pair of delicate white hands suddenly covered the young man's eyes from behind. A somewhat naughty voice came into his ears, and a soft body leaned on Luo Ya's back. The black-haired young man smelled the familiar fragrance of the girl's body, and he couldn't help but feel a little helpless, but then he opened his mouth to answer. Hee, the answer is correct. After a light kiss, Ai Lizzie let go of the little hand that covered the young man's eyes, turned around, and came to the front of Luo Ya. She threw herself into the young man's arms and rubbed against him, obviously very happy. Feeling the warmth of the girl in his arms, Luo Ya's face couldn't help but smile. Yes, but it's not too early. The banquet will start soon. That's right. Almost all the servants are busy over there today. It's rare for them to come back, so father must have attached great importance to it. However, at this time, there will probably be fewer people attending. In the Saint Maester theocracy, other than the royal family of the Holy Capital, all the nobles would celebrate the new year with their families. On the first night of the new year, a banquet would be held to entertain the upper echelons of the territory as well as the lower-ranked nobles. Luo Ya had hosted similar New Year's banquets several times when she was the acting overlord. But unlike when Kadia hosted them, it was more like a company's annual meeting. In fact, Akate Hill was indeed like a new startup company at that time. It was precisely because of this major event that Kadia and the others want to catch up on their sleep this morning. Otherwise, staying up all night was not a big problem for high-level superhumans. Thinking about the crisis that could occur at any time, Luo Ya's expression inevitably became more serious. And as if sensing Luo Ya's mood, the silver-haired girl's smile began to slowly disappear. Elder brother, did something happen after I left? Why? Elder brother is the one who thought this kind of thing could be hidden from me? Looking at the boy who slightly widened his eyes, the silver-haired girl reached out her hand, gently stroked Luo Ya's cheek, and softly said, Ai Lizzie? The girl sighed slightly, looked down at the boy's hand, and said with some heartache, when the black-haired boy was still young and weak, every time he encountered a difficult choice in crisis, Luo Ya would use this method to relieve the pressure and at the same time, encourage himself in his heart and force himself to take action. Surprised? Elder brother used this kind of hint to himself a lot when he was young, and I already knew about it. Elder brother, I'm now a high-level superhuman, and I'm almost an adult. Although I'm a bit arrogant, I feel that I already have some ability, and it's time to share some of your burden. So, Can you tell me what's in your heart? To be honest, even if AI Lizzie was already a level 3 source-level superhuman, Luo you didn't want to involve the girl in danger, but this time the situation was a bit special. AI Lizzie, actually, I just received a hint from the ancient gods. For Luoya, Arcot City was his hometown, and for AI Lizzie, this was also the place where she met Luoya, got to know each other, and fell in love with him. It was filled with countless precious memories, and anyone who wanted to destroy this place was an absolute enemy for the girl. Saying so, the silver-haired girl was unusually angry, but after a few seconds of anger, AI Lizzie recovered and looked at the black-haired boy. This time there's too little information, so I don't have any good ideas. Previously, I wrote a letter to the Vatican and Lo She, requesting for reinforcements, but that's all. The silver-haired girl lowered her head and pondered. Seeing the nervous AI Lizzie, Luoya blinked and comforted her. Elder brother, I understand. Now everything is still uncertain, but if there's any accident, I will do my best to protect this place and you. So don't worry, AI Lizzie. Leaning on the boy's chest, the silver-haired girl breathed in Luoya's scent, and her accelerated heartbeat slowly calmed down. Not long after, there was a knock on the door, and Anna's voice came through the door. Okay, got it. No matter the situation, the black-haired boy always had a smile on his face, treated people politely, and didn't lose his dignity at any banquet. In addition to his handsome face, which was determined by his genes, he could be said to be the perfect heir. Even if his heart was clouded by what happened before, facing Kadia and the officials of the territory, Luoya still smiled and politely responded to the nobles who came to chat. Because of the harmonious relationship between the Arcot family, there were many nobles on AI Lizzie's side. But unlike previous years, the nobles who chatted with AI Lizzie were more respectful than before. In fact, before Kadia's return, the well-informed people had already heard that the Marquis intended for this talented and beautiful pair. Everyone had basically tacitly approved the union of a boy and a girl. Under such circumstances, everyone's attitude towards Elisa naturally went up a notch. Looking at AI Lizzie, who was surrounded by noble women, the black-haired boy couldn't help but smile bitterly. At the same time, he was proud of the current Arcot family. But, no matter how monstrous she was, AI Lizzie's personality didn't change. Normal social interactions were fine, but she didn't seem to be good at this kind of situation. AI Lizzie was about to reach adulthood, so she could handle these small matters by herself. If Luoya helped her out, it would be easy for others to think that he was overprotective, which would lower the evaluation of AI Lizzie. This time, Luoya didn't tell Kadia about the Witch Queen's warning. It wasn't because he was afraid that Kadia wouldn't believe him, but because Luoya's father didn't have much time left in Arcot territory. In this kind of situation, Luoya might be in danger without any evidence, which would only make others think that he was being unreasonable. And if the trip was delayed, Kadia would also violate military law, which would lead to serious consequences. Although with the Arcot family's status, they definitely wouldn't treat him as a deserter. The Alliance army wouldn't do nothing and set a bad precedent. If that happened, Kadia's reputation would plummet, and the Arcot family would be humiliated. Following such rules, Luoya casually greeted the officials. But not long after, Anna suddenly bowed and came to the boy's side, whispering to Luoya, "Young master, the letter from the scholar country that you asked me to pay attention to has arrived." Chapter 532. Luoya expected that she would be busy dealing with government affairs after returning to the Arcot family. However, a person's energy was limited. Since she had to shift her attention to the Arcot territory, it was inevitable that she would pay less attention to the outside world. As a personal maid who had accompanied Luoya since he was young, Anna was destined to never betray him. Therefore, Luoya left all the important documents and matters to her. In the banquet hall, the maid walked through the crowd with a gentle bow. The nearby officials politely made way for her. For those who often met with Luoya, even though Anna was a maid, her position was like Luoya's secretary. Everyone knew this, so they treated her with extra respect. After returning to the study room, Luoya picked up the letter that was placed on the table under the care of a servant. Looking at the personal signature of Dean Antonio, the black-haired young man couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Since he had the time to write a personal letter, it meant that there shouldn't be any major issues over there. Antonio's letter basically described the current situation in the northern mountains of the Austin Empire. According to the Dean, the encirclement was currently shrinking, and through a special spell detection, it was confirmed that there were high-tier transcendents in the encirclement. And there were people in the mountains. The only possibility was that they were cultists. The probability of them being a collector was even higher. That was why Antonio's special operations team was moving forward with extreme caution, afraid that they would miss this big fish. According to Dean Antonio, due to the importance of this operation and the possible threat of the collector, Bishop John had personally come over. The two kings of the first source rank race were ready to work together to eliminate this scourge that had lived for countless years to improve Luoya's current safety situation. Bishop John wasn't in the holy capital. This news was no different from bad news to Luoya. After all, in Luoya's mind, the safest situation was for Bishop John to secretly come over. After reading the letter, the black-haired boy couldn't help but stand up. It had to be said that the current situation made Luoya feel somewhat uneasy. It wasn't just the departure of the Holy See, but more importantly, the timing. Come to think of it, the appearance of the collector this time was very strange. As a person who had been hiding under the theocracy's nose for hundreds of years, it was unbelievable that he would be discovered in the wilderness. It was also the reason why Luoya thought it was a trap for Antonio. It wasn't Antonio and the others who discovered the collector. It was the collector who restrained Antonio and even lured John to the Holy See. If it was the second scenario, then the situation would be completely different. The appearance of the collector would be a diversion and Luoya would be like an isolated island waiting for the storm to come. No matter if it was Dean Antonio or Bishop John, they were both the kings of Source Level 1 races. Bishop John even had the bloodline of an angel. No matter what era it was, they would always be the strongest. If they really caught the collector, perhaps he would have to pay a huge price. Without a doubt, this was a miracle for the man who had been silently observing the Akit race from a dark room for decades. If all of this was really a conspiracy, then the goal must be huge. Gazing at the streets outside, the black-haired young man narrowed his eyes and thought of the worst possibility. Anna gazed at the young man who was rather agitated and asked worriedly, "What's wrong with you?" "It's fine, don't worry." Although Luoya made a lot of assumptions that sounded reasonable, one had to admit that these were just groundless guesses to others. In fact, according to common sense, the situation wasn't bad at all. Instead, it was great. The boy hoped for such a future, but it was also the least possible. In the face of any situation, one must anticipate the worst and take the most active action. This was Luoya's principle of doing things, and this time was no exception. At this point, it was too late for Luoya to summon the Dean back. That was why the black-haired boy didn't choose to ask for Antonio's support. Instead, he suggested for Antonio to attack fiercely. After writing the letter, Luoya's expression eased a little. After instructing Anna to use the Akit family's channels to send it out immediately, the black-haired boy stood up and returned to the banquet hall. To Luoya, today was a day of bad news. However, to most of the people in Akit territory, today was still a holiday. It represented the conclusion of a year of hard work and holidays. Nothing much had changed, so Luoya adjusted his expression before entering the door. Since there was no help, he might as well live his life peacefully. In fact, in the face of Luoya's disguise, no one could see through it except for one person. "Madam AI Lizzie, if you want to go ahead. It's fine with us." The girls looked at the black-haired boy in the distance and persuaded AI Lizzie to go look for their elder brother. Facing the good intentions of her friends, AI Lizzie hesitated for a while and didn't reject. Could it be that something else had happened? However, the guests didn't expect that after the silver-haired girl and the black-haired boy met, they didn't speak sweet nothings. Instead, they spoke worriedly. "It's nothing, just a few letters from the Dean. It's about the progress of the cultist encirclement in the northern part of the Austin Empire." Hearing Luoya's answer, The silver-haired girl blinked and felt slightly relieved. She thought that the boy was Antonio, who was focused on fighting in the front lines. But to be honest, the girl didn't care too much about it. After all, when AI Lizzie entered the school, Antonio had left the school to participate in the international conference. When he returned, he was also busy with the cultist encirclement. He didn't even have the time to meet AI Lizzie, the new ring-bearer. As long as it wasn't about her elder brother, it was fine. The black-haired boy felt that he alone was enough to deal with worries. AI Lizzie was already nervous because of Luo Ya's words, so there was no need to tell the girl more bad news. After all, other than making AI Lizzie's heart heavier, it didn't change the situation. After experiencing the baptism of news for a day, the black-haired boy was even more worried. But unlike before, this time Luoya forced himself to rest. Under the same roof, unless Luoya lay in bed like a piece of wood for the whole night, the silver-haired girl would definitely know if he woke up in the middle of the night. With this thought, the black-haired boy took the initiative to cast a sleeping spell on himself, but the effect wasn't obvious. After tossing and turning for half the night, Luoya was even more tired when the sun rose. Luoya helplessly admitted that he didn't seem to have the talent to cast spells. And in this fatigue, the black-haired boy welcomed the last day of accompanying Kadia. It had to be said that Kadia's holiday was a little short, but even this short period of time was already the limit of the frontline soldiers, so the black-haired boy didn't complain in his heart. For the next period of time, the war with the aliens will be the main theme. And according to the information collected by the Alliance so far, the aliens may have multiple king-level targets this time. Yes, the alien strength has reached source level 1. Based on the history of the previous alien wars, their combat strength even surpasses the human race's king. Hearing Kadia's words, the black-haired boy and silver-haired girl's expressions turned serious at the same time. Luoya didn't need to be mentioned for the time being. He had already seen several source level 1 human powerhouses, and AI Lizzie had also witnessed Raiden's strength in the previous civil war of the theocracy. Looking at the children frowning and deep in thought, the Marquis nodded in satisfaction. He was happy that these two gifted children didn't underestimate the enemy. Hearing Kadia's warning, Luoya and AI Lizzie's expressions became more serious, but the Marquis' words didn't end there. After hesitating for a moment, Kadia looked at the black-haired boy and spoke again. Especially you, Luoya, you have to be especially careful. Chapter 533. Ever since he was a child, Luoya felt that he had always been targeted. From the girl who might destroy Luoya to the cultists who had a feud with the Akot family, all of them were potential threats. The mutants, a group of brainless people wandering in the wild. How could they have a feud with him? Father, do you mean that my brother is being targeted by those monsters? It's not my opinion that the mutants might be harmful to the Akot bloodline. It's the prediction of the Intelligence Analysis Department of the Joint Army, and the reason is very simple. It's the connection between the mutants and the Savior. Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. Although this sentence did not exist in Shia, as long as one was an outstanding military strategist, the enemy's thoughts could be roughly followed, and they would often have the same idea, especially when facing a powerful enemy. As the organization that commanded the entire human race to fight against the mutants, the headquarters of the Joint Army gathered a group of scholars who had been studying the mutants for many years. Most of them were from the country of scholars, but they were stationed in the eastern region all year round, carrying out in-depth research on the mutants in all aspects. The eastern region was not a good place. Compared to the capital of the country of scholars, Leinster, it could even be called a barren land. These scholars abandoned the preferential treatment of the country of scholars and took root in the poor border all year round to study the enemy. Once accidents happened, they were often injured or killed. In peacetime, they were obviously not valued. In the past 1,000 years, human beings had a considerable understanding of the mutants through continuous analysis. Whether it was resistance or living habits, they could be said to have a comprehensive understanding of the mutants. However, the source of the mutants had always been an unsolved mystery. Among them, The relationship between the mutants and the revival of the Savior was also one of the key points of their attention. Luoya was not surprised by this. How could such a group of old people forget the humiliation of the past? Because of this, they were very sensitive to the relationship between the Savior and the fallen. Doubts about the relationship between the two had long appeared within the upper echelons of human beings. Kadia's face was serious as he said this, while Roja frowned deeply after listening to the Marquis's words. Luo Ya's taunt face was still an advantage when fighting monsters and leveling up. However, if he encountered the king-class mutants that Kadia mentioned, he would be in an extremely dangerous situation. He might even be targeted by the mutants' army. At such a time, knowing how to use troops was very important. After hearing Kadia's words, Luo Ya and AI Lizzie naturally paid more attention to military theory. After a series of sand table battles, Kadia was satisfied with their results. The Marquis was very happy, and Luoya was even more relieved because the sand table battle with Kadia was just an ordinary military game. On the actual battlefield, Luoya still had many tricks up his sleeve. After successfully passing the test, Kadia instructed the two to continue improving themselves. After inspecting the black-haired boy and the silver-haired girl, the normal parting session of the family finally began. The task given by the Marquis to AI Lizzie wasn't difficult. In fact, to a certain extent, it was exceptionally simple. However, in the eyes of the boys and girls, this task was impossible. That was to record the date of the two of them sleeping together. What's wrong? This is an easy task, right? Is there a problem? After his cheeks twitched twice, the black-haired boy braced himself and answered. However, Kadia narrowed his eyes and revealed a smile. Chapter 534. All in all, Luoya wasn't a person who liked small animals, whether it was in her previous life or in this life. As for Shiya's current life, Luoya wouldn't have a pet either. After all, extraordinary individuals were existences that surpassed ordinary creatures, and they had their own aura. Ordinary humans might not be able to feel it, but for small animals with sharp senses, it was very obvious. In the study room, the black-haired young man looked at the lively bird on the table. His cheeks twitched slightly, and his heart ached like a tourist who had just been cruelly ripped off. On the other side, the silver-haired girl's red eyes flashed with brilliance as she happily walked to the table. Big brother, this little guy is? Looking at the 50,000 points moving on the table, the black-haired young man forced a smile and explained the origin of the AI Lizzie. It was obvious that compared to Luoya, the innocent silver-haired girl liked small animals more, and in fact, the AI Lizzie with life energy was indeed a friend of animals. Looking at the approaching AI Lizzie, the spirit-sensing chick didn't show affection like ordinary animals, nor did it show obedience like monsters. Instead, it kept approaching Luoya on the table as if it couldn't feel the girl's life energy. Seeing this kind of bird, the black-haired young man raised his eyebrows curiously. 1 second to remember. Compared to AI Lizzie, the undead gods like the Ghulandair were more likely to attract the interest of birds. The silver-haired girl's life energy might be similar to bait to other animals, but for the spirit-sensing chick, it was like arsenic that countered each other. Looking at the bird that was about to jump onto Luo Ya's hand, the black-haired young man felt strange. According to the principle of the spirit-sensing chick, the only people this creature would be close to would be the god it guarded and the priest who was in charge of it. Big brother, this little guy seems to like you a lot. This kind of closeness, it's as if Big Brother is related to it from the beginning. Hearing AI Lizzie's happy words, the black-haired young man couldn't help but be stunned. The next moment, his eyes suddenly widened. Looking down at the small bird with silver-gray feathers and green eyes, the black-haired young man had a thought. After thinking for a moment, he reached out his hand and released a small amount of curse power. But in the absence of a connecting channel, theoretically speaking, their auras shouldn't be leaked. At the very least, they shouldn't be seen through by the little bird. which was the guardian beast. After eliminating this possibility, there seemed to be only one possibility left: life facing death. This was a skill that Luoya had obtained from Shiya's blessing when she had broken through to the 3rd level of the source rank. Any skill like this would allow the blessed person to be tainted with the aura of a god. In order to test this conjecture, the black-haired young man slowly released a trace of curse power that contained the aura of blessing. And just as Luoya had guessed, the moment the curse power appeared, the spiritual sensing chick became excited. The silver-gray bird seemed to be revived at this moment. It suddenly raised its head and made a clear chirp. Then, it spread its wings and flew back and forth in the study room. Seeing such a spiritual sensing chick, Luoya had a judgment in his mind. The young man muttered to himself, surprised by the system's great power. It could actually find the guardian bird that worshipped Shiya in ancient times. Then, he felt that the 50,000 favorability points that he had spent seemed to be acceptable. Luoya, who thought so, couldn't help but smile. But it had to be said that now was not the time to measure the value of this curse vessel. Luoya exchanged it from the system with high hopes. Chapter 535. How familiar would the two of them be with each other since they were young? This question might not be easy to answer, because compared to other families, the Akkad family's environment was different. Of course, for a family like Akkad, whose numbers had withered to the extreme, Kadia was delighted to see such a scandal. Unfortunately, the earnest youth did not cause it to happen. Even so, it did not change the fact that the children of the Akkad family lacked the love and care of their elders. All along, Luoya had some understanding of AI Lizi's moves, and because of that, when the girl made the opposite move, the black-haired young man didn't react in time and caused a big problem. Although Kadia didn't return home often, he had taken care of AI Lizi since young and was even the silver-haired girl's mentor in curses. This time, he came back to assist the girl. Now that they had to go to the front lines and might not be able to see each other for a few years, it was normal for AI Lizi to be depressed. Luoya naturally wouldn't ask AI Lizi to overcome it. Or rather, Luoya felt that this kind of feeling was a real person. But tonight, if the girl wanted to act coquettishly, she should be allowed to do so. Yes, of course. Big brother, please believe in me. The feeling of uneasiness might be nothing to ordinary people, and it wasn't a big problem for most extraordinaries, but for Luoya, who had experienced danger since young and was very sensitive to his intuition, it was like a constant warning bell ringing in his ears. Maintaining the tension before entering the battlefield would undoubtedly waste a lot of energy, and it might even cause him to lose the opportunity to strike first when something really happened. Luoya, who fought on the front lines all year round, was naturally aware of this, and this was one of the reasons why Luoya agreed to AI Lizi's request tonight. AI Lizi, do we have to do this? In a room illuminated by moonlight, the black-haired young man sat on a chair by the window, and in front of him, a silver-haired girl was kneeling on one knee between Luoya's knees. She reached out and wrapped her arms around his neck, her red eyes flashing. For example, a certain masochist girl would often pull Luoya's tie in this position when she was young, forcing him to look at her. But for AI Lizi, who had been obedient since young, this position almost never happened. Was she thinking of a treatment plan? Even if Luoya didn't put up any defenses, AI Lizi was an expert in curses, and it would take a lot of effort to succeed. This was the terrifying curse resistance of high-level extraordinaries, and also a major difference between them and high-level extraordinaries. In this situation, it was normal to think of a plan. Strictly speaking, AI Lizi was indeed thinking, but she wasn't thinking about the hypnosis plan, but whether or not to make a move tonight. Needless to say, compulsory command was a type of hypnosis spell similar to mind control. The person under the spell would become a puppet, doing everything according to the spellcaster's orders, and even taking the initiative to end their own life. It could be said that it was an extremely powerful ability. Hint of Love was one of the most popular love stories in Shiya's history. The general content was about a girl who was highly skilled in hypnosis spells falling in love with a handsome king. She couldn't help it, but she couldn't confess her feelings. After a long period of torment, she chose to use hypnosis spells to make the king fall in love with her. However, just like Shiya's iron law, there was a price to pay for any gain. Such a long-lasting spell had a price, and one of them was that the two of them had to drink water from a well in the palace every day. Chapter 536. In Luo Ya's memory, every time he shared a bed with Ai Lizzie, it was a very troublesome experience. He had to think of all kinds of ways to avoid the girl's little tricks. When they woke up in the morning, it was already good enough that they hugged each other normally. Sometimes, she would even mess up her clothes, which gave Luoya a headache. When he discovered this, the black-haired boy thought that the sun rose from the west, but when he recalled what Ai Lizzie did last night, Luoya didn't feel that strange anymore. He had to admit that this girl was very different from the usual girl. She was less playful, but more gentle as a woman. And it was this gentleness that made Luoya feel something special. Thinking so, the boy stared at the sleeping girl, and for a moment, his heart was moved. At the same time, his heart was filled with gratitude towards the girl. After a good night's rest, Luoya's spirit was refreshed, but even so, the boy didn't make any noise. Instead, he quietly got out of bed and silently walked out of the house. Well, don't go in first. Ai Lizzie is still sleeping inside. After talking to Anna at the door, Luoya didn't choose to eat breakfast first. Instead, he washed up and walked out of the mansion. He went to the backyard garden, then looked at the distant sky as if he was waiting for something. Closing his eyes slightly, the black-haired boy in the garden silently waited while channeling his power. After the sun rose completely, a small figure flew across the sky and landed on the Akkad mansion. This is, although the spiritual chick was a moving target for powerful, extraordinary individuals, it was quite difficult to catch in the natural world. Not only did it fly very fast, but it also didn't feel tired and wouldn't land. Most importantly, it had Shiya's scent. In this world named after the primordial goddess Shiya, having Shiya's aura on one's body was equivalent to hugging the strongest thigh. Under normal circumstances, any creature in the natural world would subconsciously avoid it, even if it was a demon. Naturally, the spiritual fledgling would not be attacked. Looking at this obvious trace, Luoya frowned deeply. No matter what, a creature that disrespected Shiya wouldn't be good. The appearance of this thing itself was a bad omen. But after sensing the result of the spiritual chick's detection, the black-haired boy narrowed his eyes in confusion. A summoned creature of a cult? Or something else? Whether it was in Akkad City or in the mountains and rivers, the situation of the curse was quite normal. The only thing that was different was the sky. The reaction of the curse was stronger than usual, but now was the time when it was easy to snow. Shiya's weather often gathered the curse power, so Luoya wasn't sure if there was something fishy going on. Looking at the slightly gloomy sky in the distance, the black-haired boy slowly frowned. For a moment, he had a bad feeling in his heart. The only exception was the Queen of Witches. As a witch, Altacia often floated in the air and was Luoya's main aerial combat force. But to get rid of the trouble and reconnect with Luoya, it would take time. Lord Luoya, the mission you gave us, we have completed it for now. In Akkad City, which they were most familiar with, 2 days was more than enough for them to investigate suspicious people with the help of 3 level 3 source-grade experts. It was a pity that Cynthia did not find anything either. Hearing the report from Cynthia and the others, Luoya fell into silence for a while. But the black-haired boy wasn't surprised by this result. After all, Akkad City was right under Luoya's nose. Any movement here would easily alert him. If Luoya was a cult member, he wouldn't have alerted him. After thinking for a long time, the black-haired boy encouraged the Church of Fortitude and Church of Power, who had worked for 2 days and 2 nights. Then, he asked Cynthia and the others to rest for a while to recover from the 2 days of work. After everyone left the room, Luoya carefully considered the current situation. Without specific information about the enemy, naturally, he couldn't make any effective countermeasures, but it wasn't that he couldn't do anything. The answer to this question had changed since ancient times. In ancient times, it was wood and branches, warm and dry land, and Shiya's blessing. But in today's human society, it was the approval of the sovereign country, sufficient funds and manpower, and the ability to protect. Safety was the prerequisite for stability. This was an eternal truth, and the enchantment of the city was one of the things that was born for this reason. In the beginning of the Third Era, it could be said to be the artifact that protected mankind through the most difficult time. Akkad City, as a city with a history of nearly 1,000 years, naturally had this kind of citadel curse vessel. Well, at least in terms of individual items, there is nothing more valuable than the citadel curse vessel. The enchantment of Akkad City, let alone the new residents who came here in recent years, even Luoya himself hadn't really seen it. In fact, as the enchantment that could only be activated at the most critical moment when the city was attacked, the number of times it was activated in history could be counted with one's fingers, and the reason was very simple. One was that it was useless, and the other was the price. There was almost no external war, and it was one of the foundations of the theocracy for thousands of years. This kind of environment determined that the enchantments of various cities were mostly useless, and even gradually abandoned over a long period of time. Of course, Akkad Hill was an exception. Usually, the huge maintenance fee of the curse vessel was counted in the military budget, but every time it was activated, it required a lot of expenses. Every time it was activated, it would cost at least 100,000 gold coins, and there was no upper limit. To be honest, with the economic strength of Akkad Hill in the past, the territory was basically on the verge of bankruptcy. Fighting with one's life on the battlefield might not necessarily lead to death, but once the enchantment was activated, one would really die of poverty. However, if one were to ask if he was willing to part with it, then the answer was without a doubt. For the activation of the enchantment, Luoya, who had carefully planned for his whole life, was reluctant to part with it. If the current situation wasn't so bad, the black-haired young man would rather live on the city wall every night than let people fiddle with this thing. This thing, the activation cost is, elder brother, 150,000 gold coins? 150,000 gold coins to activate the enchantment? Looking at the gloomy sky above his head, and looking at Ai Lizzie and others who were looking at him worriedly, the black-haired young man's face was tangled for a long time. In the end, he chose to play it safe. After taking a deep breath, Luoya gritted his teeth and spoke again. Yes, sir. Compared to the safety of the loved ones around him, money was just a worldly possession, and to some extent, the fortress curse vessel was also necessary. After repeatedly thinking about the rationality of his thoughts, the black-haired young man's mood calmed down a lot. He turned around and looked at the fortress curse vessel on the eve of the activation. Luoya sighed softly and prayed that he could rely on this ancestral legacy to get through the most difficult days. Feeling the crown's source substance in his body muttering to himself, the black-haired young man's face became more determined as he silently waited for the arrival of reinforcements. In the Akkad Hill of the Saint Maester theocracy, Luoya was preparing for war with the only information he had to resist the uneasiness in his heart. In the far east, in the St. Fran fortress of the Kingdom of Knights, a knight in heavy armor looked out of the window, feeling strange about the inexplicable discomfort he felt recently. To put it bluntly, this was an extreme world where the strong preyed on the weak. However, compared to other places, this was more cruel. The weak on the battlefield would lose their lives, and the strong would gain glory and praise. From the perspective of a race, the strong would gain the right to survive. Is it because of overwork? Or is it because of the pressure? Wilhelmina Cambernet, this name had spread far and wide in the Human Alliance army. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was like thunder in the ears. Since that battle, Wilhelmina could be said to have become famous overnight. The soldiers of various countries on the front line paid more attention to her, and she had become one of the 3 most famous female commanders in the East. She was often compared to the Austin Empire's Queen Lillian and the Saint Maester theocracy's Princess Nuwa Iyer. No, there are so few battles in the winter. It shouldn't be because of overwork. There's no pressure or anything. Well, there's no need to lie about this kind of thing. It had been a year since the Challengers Cup ended. In this 1 year, Wilhelmina's changes were incomparable to the changes in the past 10 years. It involved her personality, appearance, strength, and other aspects. However, when talking about these changes, one person had to be mentioned, and that was Luo Ye. Although the Dawn Order was a newly established organization, it was the result of Wilhelmina's hard work. However, in the face of Luo Ye's request to merge, the young lady agreed without any reservations and even took the initiative to give up her leadership rights. It was fine for outsiders who didn't know Wilhelmina well, but for Teresa, as her elder sister, the changes were exceptionally obvious. Wilhelmina's thoughts were as clear as day. However, Wilhelmina had always been unwilling to admit it. After a long silence, Miss Knight said these words in a low voice. Then, she stood up and tried to escape. Teresa sighed again, but this time, she did not choose to let Wilhelmina go. After thinking for a moment, Teresa raised the book again. Wait, what you're feeling, could it be related to him? Chapter 537. In the room in San Fran Fortress, when Wilhelmina saw the words in the book that the pink-haired girl was holding, she suddenly stopped in her tracks. Her orange-red eyes widened slightly as if she was frozen in time. Although it had been a year since the end of the Challengers Cup, and Luo Ye had declared that she would not use Wilhelmina as a substitute, it was a fact that the girl had been wearing that armor for a long time. Even now, due to the accelerated growth effect and some reasons that she did not want to disclose, Wilhelmina was still wearing that armor. For example, a while ago, the gray-blue-haired girl panicked because she could not sense Luo Ye's presence, which affected her combat state. Only when the Rosette Dawn members at the rear reported that Luo Ye had defeated the 6 disasters did she finally feel relieved. The pink-haired girl held the pen and thought so. On the other side, Wilhelmina also regained her senses, but after thinking for a while, she began to doubt. Your oath can infinitely shorten the distance between each other. It's not a big deal to communicate with each other, right? Wilhelmina hesitated and fell into silence after reading the words on Teresa's notebook. The pink-haired girl pondered for a moment before raising her notebook again and said, 1 second to remember. No, I'm sure that's not the case. After all, our positions are different. There's not much to compare. Currently, there were 3 female commanders who were frequently active on the battlefield. They were Lillian Ackman of the Austin Empire's Noise Fortress, Nuwa Iyer Heathcliff of the St. Maester Empire's New Tucker Fortress, and Wilhelmina Cobbleheart of the St. Fran Fortress. Lillian Ackman was the highest level among the 3. Her strength had reached source rank 2, but based on her current battle record, she was best at defense. Nuwa Iyer Heathcliff was the latest to reach source rank 3. It had only been a year, but his AoE attack was the strongest out of the 3. He excelled in head-on battles on large battlefields, and his Angel King bloodline gave Nuwa Iyer a terrifying corrosive power. As long as an enemy was touched by his attack, it would be hard for them to escape the fate of being destroyed. Finally, Wilhelmina Cobbnet was the most well-rounded individual among the 3 of them. However, it wasn't as if she didn't have a specialty, which was her ability to make breakthroughs in one area. With 3 completely different priorities, it was impossible to compare them. In fact, the soldiers on the front lines were basically bragging about their own teams, so there was nothing to compete about. Didn't you write to him before? In Wilhelmina's opinion, her relationship with Luo Ye wasn't that close yet. If it were Nuwa Iyer or Lillian who sensed this, they could have written a letter to Luo Ye directly. But to Wilhelmina, doing so would be too intimate. Although that is indeed the case, Mina, if it were them, they wouldn't have considered this. After a few moments of silence, Wilhelmina replied in disappointment. Teresa puckered her brows and picked up her pen again. But I didn't do anything for him, did I? I couldn't even find him when he was young, let alone protect him. Going to the academy will only give him trouble and force my thoughts on him. Chapter 538. The sky in Akhat territory had been a little strange recently, and it was one of the most talked about things in the city. Just like in Luo Yu's previous life, the top topics weren't necessarily important scientific discoveries, but the topics that people were interested in would definitely be at the top. The long night in Akhat territory was undoubtedly the most talked about topic. At first, people thought that it was just a sudden appearance of rain and snow. After all, the night was the longest at the end of the year, so it was possible to encounter a cloudy day that looked like it was still dark. However, people soon realized that something was wrong. The greatly increased nighttime made people's lives chaotic. The time that the streets were brightly lit was greatly extended, and there were many different reasons for this situation. After all, for people who had lived in this land since they were young, the Akhat territory might not be able to provide prosperity, but security and stability had not changed for decades. The powerful military strength of the territory also gave them confidence. In front of the cathedral in the center of the city, people who came to pray lined up in a long line. They asked the clergy of the church about the strange phenomenon in the sky. The clergy of the church, who had already communicated with the Akhat mansion, tried their best to calm the people and maintain the order of the city. Adaptation was not nonsense, and drama was not nonsense. Although Luoya supported freedom of speech, he couldn't stand people being bewitched, especially during this time of great pressure. There was a limit to people's patience. This kind of gloominess that seemed like the sky was about to press down on them, let alone ordinary people. Even transcendents had a heavy heart. Once the short period of curiosity passed, more and more people would be worried, and the city would gradually become unstable. In the Akhat mansion, looking at the surging darkness in the sky, the black-haired boy's eyes glowed faintly. It was obvious that he was on high alert. In the past 3 days, the darkness in the sky of Akhat territory had become deeper and deeper. The pressure on the boy's perception was also getting stronger and stronger. Luoya intuitively felt that it was about to reach the critical point of eruption. Luoya noticed the concentration of magical powers, but the young man didn't take any action. The reason was simple. Through his conversations with the Gulandair and Paitila, Luoya gradually understood what the enemy was doing. They were constructing their own domains. Other than appearing in history books thousands of years ago, they were only used by the ritualistic cursemancers of the Holy See. However, most of them were sacrificial in nature and had no practical use. They want to wake up a creature with a god spirit blood pulse. This time, our opponent is in trouble. In ancient times, the highest existence in Shi Yu's world was the god. However, unlike the legends, the god was not immortal. With the passage of countless years, the changes of the times and the changes of the environment made the god gradually withdraw from the stage of history, and the mythical creatures also disappeared. However, unlike the situation of the deified races, these evil existences would not let the possessors of their own god's spirit blood pulse live on their own. Instead, they would attach themselves to the possessors of their own god's spirit blood pulse and control them. Paitila and the others determined the type of the enemy, but in fact, Luoya already knew the true identity of the enemy. The reason was simple. The young man who calmly expressed his thoughts frowned. His eyes were full of disgust as he looked at the sky. The moment he confirmed the identity of the enemy, the various questions in the young man's heart were finally answered. With the collector as bait, the 2 kings of the first source-level races in the human world who were closest to Luoya were attracted. Behind them, in St. Mestre, which was generally considered to be the safest place, the other fallen ones directly attacked Akhat Hill. They should be the ones who interfered with the passage connecting to Altacia. Since the collector, was the one who would ultimately decide the success of the plan. The collector, who was not here, naturally had to ensure that the ritual would not be interrupted. Currently, Luoya could not destroy the enemy's territory even if he used the Saint's Dagger to fly into the sky. However, if it was Altacia, it would not take long for her to completely destroy the enemy's territory. After sighing, the black-haired young man turned around and looked at Cynthia and the others. When he realized that Luoya and the ancient gods had finished their conversation, the tall woman who had been standing respectfully for a long time bowed and asked, "Yes, it's about time to activate the war alarm. Let's begin the evacuation." The war is about to begin. On the third day after the sky appeared, Akat City suddenly activated the war alarm that covered the entire city. After the alarm was activated, a large-scale evacuation began. Such a baffling evacuation naturally caused some people to be dissatisfied. However, with Luoya's prestige and recent thunderous means, no one dared to openly oppose him. The war was about to break out. After a few days of investigation, Luoya had also found the thing that hurt the spiritual fledgling. It was a kind of demon that wandered in the dark sky. It looked like a falcon and a crow with blood-red eyes. That's the Death Raven Falcon. It's a demon that grows by devouring the souls of the dead in ancient legends. To be able to control these things, I have a rough idea of who our enemy is. The Fallen, especially the Fallen that had survived since ancient times, were mostly powerful beings that were directly implicated by the fall of the Savior in ancient times. Just like the Tyrant priest who had an immeasurable lifespan in the past, their strength was usually abnormally strong. Even after the passage of time, they were still incomparable to ordinary people. This time, it was the same. Shia's angels were able to fly by relying on the wings of light formed by curses. The wings of the Winged Clan were part of their bodies. Just like the Eagle Clan, most of them had a part of the bird's symbol, either sharp claws or feathers of birds. However, just like the experience of the Tyrant priest, after Shia disappeared, the world entered an era dominated by the Savior and the Mother Goddess. As a race that soared in the sky, the Winged Clan could be said to be the race closest to the sun. Naturally, they would worship the Savior who had the title of Sun God. Everything after that was simple. The only ones who can tame the Death Raven Falcon are the Winged Clan who ruled the sky and guarded the Savior's shrine. Our opponents are probably the remnants of the fallen Winged Clan. The ancient race could be said to be one of the opponents that Luoya hated the most. As an existence that could survive for thousands of years, their strength and means would definitely be far beyond the humans' conjurers. Most importantly, Luoya was not familiar with these guys. What kind of ancient tainted artifact was it? Or was it some other kind of curse? Thanks to the hobbies of Luoya's ancestors, the city defense facilities of Akate City were perfect. There were many large and small shelters in the city. Even though the population had increased by a lot, it was still barely enough. When the residents in the city were evacuated, the black-haired boy looked at the sky that was getting more and more oppressive as he channeled the curse power in his body with all his might. At this speed, it would probably be late at night. Big brother, the curse power in the sky is getting stronger and stronger. It seems that the battle is going to start today. That means I can fight alongside Big Brother, right? Huh. Big Brother, are you going out of the city? No, that's too dangerous. The curse vessel in Akate City has been activated. There's no need to take such a risk. Luoya, who said so, shook his head. He had no intention of changing his mind. Hearing the black-haired boy's reason, AI Lizzie fell into silence for a while. The city's enchantment couldn't protect Luoya. Otherwise, why would the collector take such a big risk to appear in person? Hearing Luoya's words, the silver-haired girl showed a hesitant look. Seeing this situation, Luoya was silent for a moment. Then, he stepped forward and gently hugged AI Lizzie. But what if something unexpected happens? Looking at the worried girl, Luoya said so confidently. Seeing the boy like this, AI Lizzie's words of persuasion stopped for a while. She couldn't help but lower her head and ponder. For the time being, not to mention the Gulandair's super strong breakthrough ability. Paitila, as the mother goddess, also came and went freely on the earth. Any kind of restriction curse would be difficult to work on because most restriction curses had the earth attribute. So thinking about it carefully, the black-haired boy would rather use his full strength in the wild than to defend the city and be distracted by others. That way, his survival rate might be higher. Since the opponent in this battle was the Fallen, Luoya couldn't hold back because except for some new skills in the past year, the Collector knew him like the back of his hand. Under such circumstances, the person that the Collector could send out without worry was definitely not someone that Luoya's previous means could resist. Thinking of this, the boy's heart calmed down. For Luoya, the best encouragement for him was that the most precious person could safely survive this disaster. In this hurried preparation, time began to pass quickly, and the moment of the battle finally arrived. Nighttime was a reassuring time for most of the residents of Akate City. After a day of work, most of the people would return to their homes at this time, either alone or in a group, enjoying the most important meal of the three, dinner. But today, the residents of Akate City weren't as relaxed and peaceful as they usually were, and the reason was simple. Most of them were in the crowded underground, protected by spells, waiting for news from the outside. Putting aside the strange phenomenon in the sky, after the alarm sounded and the evacuation began, an inexplicable sense of oppression began to appear in the hearts of the people. The source was very clear. It was from the pitch-black sky. As time passed, more and more strange noises began to come from the outside world. It was a strange sound that sounded like the cries of birds, but also like the screams of humans. It continued to echo in the outside world. The first reaction of the people who heard this sound was that their hair stood on end. Under such a strange situation, no one dared to go out easily. Boom! When the blood-red light fell, everyone who stood on the ground held their breaths. At the same time, they felt an indescribable bloody aura. The world in front of them became more and more distorted and red, as if it was tempting them to go crazy. But before the soldiers could panic, a cold and calm order came from the city wall, followed by the messenger. Amidst the loud screams, a violent surge of spell power suddenly came from Akate City. The whole city trembled slightly, and then there was a rumbling sound, as if it was fighting against the existence in the sky. Amidst this sound, a blue and white pillar of light shot into the sky, and then turned into a barrier that covered the whole city, firmly blocking the blood-red light outside. It was a group of black birds with blood-red eyes that looked like crows and falcons. They opened their mouths, and the sound they made wasn't the sound of birds, but the screams of various animals. Death crow falcons, this was their name. They were also the soul-devouring birds that were feared in ancient times. Under the encirclement of these innumerable ominous creatures, a huge figure slowly appeared in the sky. Chapter 539. In an era where population was scarce and difficult, no matter where it was, people would find a specialty in their hometown. In the Akate Hill of the St. Maester theocracy, for thousands of years, the people here had always been proud of their stable lives. On the city wall, Luoya Akate looked at the distant sky. His originally cold face was now extremely dignified. The death crow falcon, an ancient evil creature, was said to not be able to cry. Its cry was always the cry of the last soul to be devoured. At this time, in the sky above Akate Hill, countless death crow falcons had gathered into a dark cloud, and their cries were like the cries of countless creatures. Thinking of this, the black-haired youth clenched his fists and secretly rejoiced at the preparations he made these past few days. If he didn't activate the enchantment in advance, just the cries of these terrifying creatures would have caused a bloody storm in Akate City. The death crow falcons in the sky not only knew how to cry, their body length ranged from tens of centimeters to a few meters, and their strength was comparable to low-level transcendence. Soon, they would launch an attack on Akate City, and that would be the real battle. More importantly, they were only supporting characters tonight. It was a huge and twisted black strange bird that seemed to cover the sky. Its head was like that of a bird and a dragon, and there were strange sarcomas on its neck. Its body was pitch black, and its blood-red eyes were like crimson stars in the clouds. The most peculiar thing about it was that it had 3 ferocious claws that were different from ordinary birds. Remember in a second, birds were one of the earliest pets of humans, and it could be said that most people's impression of them was the representation of docility. There was nothing wrong with people feeding birds, and there was nothing to be afraid of. But now, when the monster in the sky poked its head out, the people in the enchantment on the ground had a strange feeling. It was like facing a dragon or an angel, and it was an unchangeable pressure from the bloodline. It was the absolute suppression of a mythical creature on ordinary life, and the reason was very simple. Because in ancient times, this terrifying monster was indeed a noble existence close to that of a god. Gazing at the gigantic, ferocious monster in the sky, the Earth Mother's voice sounded with an inexplicable sorrow. After listening to Pei Tila's explanation, Luoya had a preliminary understanding of what he saw. Although the first holy beasts were also born in the world of Shiya, they were not created by Shiya, the creator of all things. Instead, they were the products of natural selection in the harsh evolution. They gradually grew stronger through constant battles and became the masters of the world until the arrival of Shiya. Unlike the first generation of sacred beasts, which tended to be ordinary creatures, the second generation of sacred beasts was often the product of a combination of many bloodlines. The 3-legged dragon crow was the best of the second batch of hybrid sacred beasts created by Shiya. It inherited the bloodline of the giant dragon and the ancient sacred beast, the death crow. Even in the ancient times when the gods still existed, it was one of the kings who dominated the sky. It had a warty head, messy and dirty feathers, and its deformed appearance aside, what really made people sigh was the madness and violence in its eyes, as well as the ugly flock of birds flying up and down around it. But it had to be said that although his heart was heavy, the black-haired young man did not have time to sigh over this tragedy. The moment the 3-legged dragon crow appeared, the huge skeleton on the Nirvana plain and the blonde woman in the valley became tense at the same time. They knew that the real enemy was not the gigantic monster, but someone else. The winged ruler? It was not until Shiya appeared and distributed the source form to intelligent life that the various races in the world began to embark on the path of transcendence. But even so, in the era of the second generation of sacred beasts, the other races were still not strong. When the savior fell, almost all the high-ranking members of the winged clan were implicated, and the 3-legged dragon crow did not escape the misfortune. But just like the contract in the past, the appearance of this huge monster represented a fact, and that was the arrival of the winged ruler. There were 2 figures with completely different appearances. One of them was wearing a black cloak, and his specific appearance could not be seen clearly. There were no distinctive features, and he was quite mysterious. He seemed to be a priest of the savior, while the other was an old man with a pair of wings on his back, just as Luoya expected. Chapter 540. Strictly speaking, it wasn't that there weren't any masters of Source Level 1 in Akkad Hill, but they weren't included in the general statistics. This person was the Int Cade. But even so, the power of Source Level 1 wouldn't decline too quickly. With the help of Luoya and the support of the Earth Mother, the huge Int had temporarily returned to his peak state. The huge curse power turned into countless vines that wrapped around the dragon bird like giant monster that rushed towards Luoya. The next moment, the huge Int's body burst out with light, and thousands of roots pierced into the ground. He raised his hand, and an unimaginable power gathered and burst out, pulling down the giant bird that was hovering in the sky. The enemy was high in the sky, which was not only a disadvantage for Luoya, but also for Cade. Luoya could move quickly and even fly for a short time with the power of a high-grade extraordinaire, but the cumbersome Int couldn't do that. A dim yellow light rose from the boy's body, and the next moment, it turned into an invisible weight that fell on the giant bird. Under Pei Tila's gravity curse, the three-legged dragon crow's body kept sliding down in the air, and at the same time, it roared in anger and fought back with all its strength. The giant bird that inherited some of the bloodline could use flame breath, which the int didn't expect. But Luoya, who was familiar with the origin of the three-legged dragon crow, was not surprised. He already had a countermeasure. The effect of the frozen earth was very good, but unfortunately, that was all Luoya could do. While helping the int to control the giant monster, the king of the winged men, who had been repelled, launched another attack from the sky. This time, the attack wasn't as simple as the previous one. The winged men were once the overlords of the sky, and it was as if this honor had been materialized. Legend had it that the bloodline of the winged men's king could control the sky, but in the ancient times before they were implicated by the savior, they could only control the clear sky. In Luoya's perception, the entire sky seemed to have a consciousness under the control of the winged ruler and began to show hostility toward him. Origin rank 1. That was an existence higher than Luoya's current level. Under normal circumstances, the probability of this youth defeating the winged ruler was actually very small. However, it wasn't very likely that he would be defeated and killed by the winged ruler. After all, Luoya had too many trump cards. According to the consumption of the battle with the winged ruler in the sky, the black-haired teenager could not hold on for too long. If he wanted to keep fighting, he would need to absorb the nearby magic elements. But what Luoya did not expect was that this would become the most powerful way for the enemy to suppress him. It was also at this moment that Luoya truly understood the strength of the enemy. Luoya, who discovered this, frowned deeply. Then, his body shot out like a bolt of lightning and quickly fled into the distance. As if it was chasing after him, the attack that had been brewing in the sky for a long time began to be released in one breath. In a short moment, thunder and lightning shook the sky, and the wind blades fell like rain. Facing Luoya's escape, the winged ruler did not seem to be surprised. He just continued to condense his attack. However, in the face of this non-stop attack that seemed to overturn the earth, Luoya could only use the least amount of curse power to control the frozen earth to defend himself. Feeling the concentration of magic elements in the normal area, Luoya, who had consumed a lot of curse power, began to absorb and replenish it frantically. At the same time, he stood still and was ready to counterattack. However, what he did not expect was that this feeling of returning to normal only lasted for a short second. Boom! Giants! Hateful race! The demonic essence in the vicinity had disappeared again in just a few seconds. In the past, Luoya, who had read a lot of historical materials, had seen records about the Winged tribe. In the view of the black-haired teenager, this race was not particularly worth paying attention to. After all, the Winged tribe did not have the strong physical bodies of the dragons and giants, nor did they have the curse power affinity of the angels and highland elves. They were not powerful in ancient times. Anyone who was targeted by the Winged tribe's ruler would die without a doubt. On the plains at night, the black-haired teenager and the old man with wings stretched out in the distant sky looked at each other from a distance. Both of their faces were unprecedentedly ugly. The Winged tribe's ruler approached Luoya almost instantaneously. As a high-level extraordinaire, it was so fast that even Luoya could not react in time. It was even faster than Laydon, who had once fought with him. However, if that was all, Luoya would not be surprised. After all, the Winged tribe was known for their speed. In just a moment, the magic elements in the area where Luoya was located were sucked dry and created a magic vacuum field again. This was simply incredible to Luoya. It was not until this moment that the teenager understood what it meant to control the sky. Under normal circumstances, it was not a problem to drain the magic elements in the vicinity. As long as they changed the field, it would be easy to solve. However, for Luoya, no matter where he went, the Winged tribe's ruler would definitely be one step ahead of him and activate his bloodline skill to create a magic vacuum. Anyone who is targeted by the Winged tribe's ruler will die without a doubt. I see. Is that what it means? No wonder the collector dared to take the risk. What should I do? Through the conversation just now, Luoya roughly guessed the state of the Winged tribe's ruler. Although he had fallen, the old man obviously still had his consciousness. He would not easily give up such a tactic that was almost certain to win. In fact, the winged tribe's ruler had indeed pulled away. The black-haired teenager wanted to preserve the spell as much as possible. However, in the sky, the winged tribe's ruler immediately took action after discovering Luo Ya's intention. The dark sky squirmed again, and the roar of wind and thunder was endless. After the longbow, arrows of thunder and wind appeared. A huge amount of magic elements turned into a strong spell, constantly pouring into the weapon. The winged tribe's ruler's body rose higher and higher, pulling the bowstring at the top of the sky. The moment he saw the enemy's action, Luo Ya understood that the winged tribe's ruler wanted to drain all his spell power in one blow. However, as before, Luo Ya's response was extremely limited. The enchantment that resisted the countless dead crows weakened for a moment, and then it lit up with a bright light. In the roar, it automatically entered a state of overload. Above the city wall, the silver-haired girl looked into the distance amidst the rain of blood from the enemy. AI Lizzie, who found that Luo Ya was directly under the powerful attack, panicked. However, the distance was too far for her to do anything. Under the shining arrows of wind and thunder, Luo Ya narrowed his golden eyes, thinking calmly and quickly. The unprecedented premonition of death was like ice stuck to the back of Luo Ya's neck, making the black-haired teenager's body cold and his heart beat faster. However, this did not weaken his will. Instead, it made him calmer. The winged tribe's ruler's attack was not just arrows. The moment the arrows of wind and thunder were shot, the sky also responded with the fiercest attack so far. The brilliant heavenly power and man-made calamity came at the same time. On the ground, Luo Ya's body began to glow. Golden wings stretched out behind him, and then he soared into the sky. The black-haired teenager controlled his angelic wings and chose a place where the attacks were sparse to break through. Obviously, he wanted to finish the battle in one fell swoop. However, all this did not escape the winged tribe's ruler's expectations. When he saw all the attacks stopped in the air, the huge Tyrant on the ground roared in anger. The silver-haired girl in the distance widened her eyes, and her mind went blank. Luo Ya's golden pupil shrank in an instant. He understood that this was a trap designed by the cunning enemy. All the attacks that were rolled back were instantly retracted into the winged tribe's ruler's palm. The next moment, they turned into a beam of light. It was the light of death that illuminated the dark night, and it shrouded the teenager's head. In the face of this unexpected attack, Luo Ya had no other choice. Boom! Pei-Tila's shadow appeared behind the teenager, and layers of protection wrapped Luo Ya's body. At the forefront was the fist of the Gulen Daer. It was like an unyielding flame, compressing the sky and constantly moving forward, shattering the light of death bit by bit. 500 meters was not enough. 450 meters, 450 meters, 350 meters. With the skill of the holy object, Luo Ya appeared in front of the enemy for the first time. However, even in this unexpected situation, the fallen one in the sky did not care after being slightly surprised because he knew that Luo Ya's curse power was almost exhausted. In the vacuum of magic, the black-haired teenager seemed to have become a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. Even if he approached, he could not do anything. Seeing this situation, the winged tribe's ruler showed a mocking smile on his face. However, the next moment, his smile froze, and the reason was very simple. Because he found that Luo Ya was also smiling. Finally, caught you. A calm voice with a slight smile sounded. The next moment, under the horrified expression of the winged tribe's ruler, the huge skeleton appeared again. The figure solidified in Luo Ya's blood, and the unstoppable fist smashed down on his head with the determination to win in one blow. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.